What would you do if you saw someone about to die, and saving them meant destroying yourself? Tonight, we're diving into a story of deadly poison, ruthless aristocrats, and one woman's impossible choice that changed everything. Lady Aurora Vale had seconds to decide: stay silent and survive, or speak up and face total ruin. Her decision sparked a scandal that tore through high society like wildfire and led to a showdown that no one saw coming. Stick around until the end to see how courage, cunning, and an unexpected alliance brought down an empire of lies. And if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The Ravencourt estate gleamed like a jewel box under 1,000 candles, each flame casting dancing shadows across marble floors and gilded walls. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their light splintering into rainbows that played across the silk gowns and tailored suits of England's most powerful aristocrats. The air hummed with carefully modulated conversation, the clink of champagne flutes and the subtle rustle of fortunes being made and destroyed in whispered asides. Lady Aurora Vale stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, a study in controlled composure that masked the uncomfortable truth of her position. Her gown, while beautifully cut, was last season's style, a detail the sharp-eyed matrons had noted immediately. Her jewelry, though genuine, lacked the ostentatious weight that proclaimed old money and older bloodlines. She was an outsider here, invited only because her father's recent business ventures had generated enough wealth to purchase proximity to power, if not acceptance into its inner circles. "Another champagne, my lady." A footman appeared at her elbow with practiced discretion. "No, thank you." Aurora's voice was steady, cultured, giving away none of the tension coiling in her stomach. She had learned early that in rooms like this, every gesture was studied, every word weighed. One misstep could undo months of careful social climbing. Across the ballroom, she caught sight of the evening's true center of gravity, Duke Alastair Crown, standing in a cluster of nobles who orbited him like planets around a dark sun. He was a tall man, perhaps 35, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His face was all sharp angles and controlled power, his eyes the color of slate before a storm. While other men gestured expansively or laughed too loudly, the Duke remained still, and somehow that stillness made him the most compelling figure in the room. Aurora had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The Duke who had inherited his title at 21 after his father's sudden death, who had ruthlessly consolidated power, crushing rivals and absorbing their estates with cold efficiency, who was courted by every ambitious family with a marriageable daughter, yet remained stubbornly, mysteriously unattached, who attended these social spectacles with the air of a predator tolerating the presence of lesser creatures. "Frightening, isn't he?" The voice at Aurora's shoulder made her start. Lady Cecilia Hartwell, a woman perhaps 10 years Aurora's senior, materialized with the unsettling quietness of practiced aristocracy. "Our dear Duke, they say he once ruined the Ashford family over a perceived slight, destroyed their shipping business in a fortnight. The patriarch died of apoplexy, they claim, though I suspect it was simply the shock of being outmaneuvered so thoroughly." Aurora studied Lady Cecilia carefully. The woman's smile was pleasant, her tone conversational, but there was something calculating in her eyes. "You speak of him as if he's a natural disaster, rather than a man." "Perhaps there's little difference." Cecilia's laugh was light, musical. "In any case, one doesn't oppose the Duke. One either aligns with him or stays far, far out of his way." The warning, delivered so prettily, was nevertheless unmistakable. Aurora inclined her head in acknowledgement, and Lady Cecilia glided away, her burgundy gown trailing like spilled wine across the polished floor. The dinner bell chimed, a pure crystalline note that cut through the chatter. The crowd began its choreographed movement toward the vast dining hall, a space that could seat 100 with room to spare. Aurora found her assigned seat carefully positioned in the middle ranks. Not at the Duke's table, of course, but not relegated to the social Siberia of the far end either. A precise measurement of her family's ambiguous status. As she settled into her chair, Aurora took in her immediate neighbors. Lord Pemberton, a florid man whose fortune came from coal mines in the north. His wife, who studied Aurora with the intensity of a jeweler examining a questionable gem, and across the table the Honorable Marcus Thorne, a younger son with political ambitions and a reputation for clever cruelty disguised as wit. "Lady Aurora!" Marcus leaned forward, his smile sharp. "How delightful to see fresh faces among our tired old crowd. Tell me, what does your father do exactly? Something in trade, I understand." The word trade carried just enough emphasis to sting. Aurora met his gaze without flinching. "My father invests in various enterprises, railways primarily. He believes in the future of transportation." "Ah, railways." Marcus exchanged a knowing look with Lord Pemberton. "How very practical." Before Aurora could respond, the room fell into an expectant hush. The Duke had entered, moving toward the head table with that same controlled grace. He wore black, as he always did, evening dress cut with such precision it might have been armor. As he passed Aurora's table, his gaze swept across the room in a single, comprehensive glance, taking in everything and revealing nothing. The first course arrived on pristine white china, a delicate consommé garnished with herbs. Aurora picked up her spoon, acutely aware that even her table manners were being assessed. Around her, conversation resumed its careful rhythm. Gossip delivered as observation, insults wrapped in compliments, alliances forming and fracturing with every carefully chosen word. "I heard the Ashtons lost their estate in Kent," Lady Pemberton murmured to her husband, loud enough for the table to hear. "Gambling debts, they say, though others suggest it was poor investments. Either way, quite ruinous." "The danger," Marcus interjected smoothly, "of pretending to wealth one doesn't actually possess. Better to know one's place than to reach beyond one's grasp and fall spectacularly." Aurora felt the comment like a blade sliding between her ribs, perfectly aimed. She set down her spoon with deliberate calm. "I've always thought it more dangerous to remain static. Fortunes change. Those who don't adapt are left behind." "How very American of you," Marcus's smile widened. "All that vigorous ambition. Here we tend to value stability, legacy, knowing the difference between genuine quality and gilded imitation." The second course appeared. Dover sole with lemon butter sauce. Aurora forced herself to take a bite, to chew, to swallow, though the exquisite fish tasted like ash. This was the price of admission to these circles, constant, subtle humiliation, delivered with impeccable manners and plausible deniability. From her vantage point, Aurora could see the Duke's table clearly. He sat at the center, flanked by the most powerful nobles in attendance. To his right, Lady Vivian Ashford, a stunning widow in her early 40s whose family's shipping empire had somehow survived its earlier conflicts with the Duke. She laughed at something he said, her hand resting briefly on his arm, a gesture of familiarity that raised eyebrows throughout the room. To his left sat Lord Chancellor Hastings, the king's own representative, and beside him, Countess Eleanor Blackwood, whose political influence rivaled that of most men in Parliament. These were the true power brokers, the ones who shaped policy and determined fates with a word in the right ear. Aurora watched as Lady Vivian engaged the Duke in animated conversation, her gestures elegant, her expression warm. The woman was known for her charm, her sharp wit, her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of high society with seemingly effortless grace. Yet something about the scene struck Aurora as discordant, though she couldn't immediately identify what. The third course? Roasted quail with a cherry reduction. Wine stewards moved through the room like ghosts, refilling glasses with practiced efficiency. Aurora noted the different vintages being served. French Burgundy for the Duke's table, lesser wines for the rest. Even the refreshments were hierarchical. "I must say," Lord Pemberton announced, his voice carrying across their section of the table, "this is exceptional hospitality. Lord Ravencourt has outdone himself, though I suppose when one is courting favor with the Duke, no expense can be spared." "Speaking of favor," Marcus said, his eyes glinting with malice, "I couldn't help but notice your father's recent difficulties, Lady Aurora. Something about a railway contract falling through? Such a shame when these modern ventures prove less reliable than traditional investments." Aurora's fingers tightened on her fork. The contract Marcus referenced had indeed fallen through. Sabotaged, her father believed, by competitors with better connections. It had cost them dearly, pushing the family to the edge of financial instability. That this jackal knew about it and chose to mention it here was calculated cruelty. Temporary setbacks are part of any ambitious enterprise, she said evenly. My father remains confident in his ventures. Confidence is admirable, Marcus replied, until it becomes delusion. The conversation might have continued in this vein, each exchange a small cut, a minor humiliation, but Aurora's attention was suddenly riveted elsewhere. At the Duke's table, Lady Vivian had just laughed at something Lord Chancellor Hastings said. In the midst of that laugh, as she reached for her wineglass, Aurora saw something that made her blood freeze. It was the smallest gesture, barely noticeable. Lady Vivian's other hand concealed by the fall of her sleeve, hovering over the Duke's wineglass for just a fraction of a second. A slight tilt of her palm, a minute opening of her fingers, and then her hand withdrew, the movement so smooth it might never have happened. But Aurora had seen it. Years of navigating social spaces while being constantly observed had trained her to notice the minute details others missed. And she had just watched Lady Vivian Ashford slip something into Duke Alistair Crown's wine. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Poison. It had to be poison. Nothing else made sense. The careful concealment, the practiced smoothness of the motion. Lady Vivian was poisoning the Duke. Here in the middle of a grand dinner, surrounded by witnesses who were too busy with their own conversations to notice. Aurora's mind raced. The Duke's glass sat before him, filled with deep red burgundy, looking innocent and lethal. He was currently engaged in conversation with Countess Blackwood, his attention focused entirely on the political discussion. Any moment now, he would reach for that glass. He would drink. And then, what? Immediate collapse? A slow, agonizing death? Either way, Lady Vivian had just committed murder in plain sight. Aurora's first instinct was to stay silent. She was nobody in this room. An outsider, barely tolerated, certainly not trusted. If she spoke up, if she made an accusation against Lady Vivian Ashford, a woman of impeccable lineage and vast influence, who would believe her? She would be dismissed as hysterical at best, as a malicious social climber at worst. Her family's already precarious position would become untenable. Stay quiet, logic screamed. This isn't your concern. Let it happen. Survival means knowing when to keep your head down. But Aurora looked at the Duke's wineglass, at the poison hidden in its depths, and knew she couldn't. Whatever Alistair Crown was, however ruthless, however dangerous, he didn't deserve to die like this, murdered by a woman's treachery while surrounded by people who would never know the truth. The Duke reached for his glass. Aurora stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every head at her table turned toward her. She didn't pause, didn't second guess. She walked directly toward the Duke's table, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "My lady, what are you—" A footman tried to intercept her, but Aurora swept past him with a determination that surprised even herself. The Duke's fingers were closing around the stem of his wineglass when Aurora reached his table. She didn't think, didn't calculate. She simply lunged forward, her hand striking the glass and sending it tumbling across the pristine white tablecloth in an explosion of red wine that looked horrifyingly like blood. The room went absolutely silent. Aurora stood there, breathing hard, aware that every single person in the dining hall was staring at her. The spilled wine dripped off the edge of the table, staining the carpet. The Duke's expression was unreadable, his slate-gray eyes fixed on her face. She leaned down, close enough that only he, and perhaps Lady Vivian and Countess Blackwood, could hear her whispered words. "It was poisoned. I saw her put something in it." The Duke's gaze didn't waver from Aurora's face, but something shifted in his expression, a sharpening, a focusing of that predatory attention. Then he looked at Lady Vivian, who had gone perfectly still. "Poisoned?" The Duke's voice was quiet, almost conversational. "That's quite an accusation, lady." "Vale," Aurora supplied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Aurora Vale. And I saw what I saw." The room erupted. "Absolutely outrageous," Lord Pemberton's voice boomed across the hall. "The girl has lost her senses." "Attention-seeking behavior," someone else called out. "Typical of the newly wealthy." Lady Vivian's expression was a masterpiece of wounded dignity. Your Grace, I cannot imagine what this young woman thinks she saw, but I assure you, you assure me of nothing. The Duke's voice, though still quiet, cut through the chaos like a blade. He stood, his height suddenly commanding, and the room fell silent again. This wine, he gestured to the spreading stain. Have it collected, all of it, every drop that can be recovered. Surely that's not necessary, Lady Vivian began. It is necessary, the Duke said flatly, if only to clear the lady's name, unless you object to such proof. A trap, Aurora realized. If Lady Vivian objected, she admitted guilt. If she agreed, the poison would be found. Either way, the Duke had seized control of the situation with ruthless efficiency. Lady Vivian's smile was brittle. Of course not. Though I must say, giving credence to such wild accusations. Wild? The Duke's gaze swept across Aurora again, assessing. The lady seems quite rational to me. Frightened, certainly, but not wild. Lord Chancellor Hastings cleared his throat. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. To disrupt a formal dinner on the word of, forgive me, a young woman of no particular standing. She has enough standing to be invited here, the Duke interrupted smoothly, which suggests Lord Ravencourt considers her worthy of his table. Do you question our host's judgment, Chancellor? It was beautifully done. Aurora watched as the Duke maneuvered the situation, using social conventions as weapons, turning potential allies into silent observers. But she also saw the other side of the equation. The stares, the whispers, the judgment in every pair of eyes turned her direction. She's desperate for attention, Marcus Thorne announced loudly from Aurora's abandoned table. Her family's in financial difficulties. What better way to force herself into notice than to create a scandal involving the Duke himself? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Aurora felt the weight of their condemnation like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. An interesting theory, the Duke said, his tone deceptively mild, though it seems an extraordinarily risky gambit. If she's wrong, she's destroyed herself completely. If she's right... He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Well, that would suggest considerable courage. Or considerable calculation, Countess Blackwood interjected. Her dark eyes studied Aurora with uncomfortable intensity. Young women have used more elaborate schemes to attract powerful men's attention. Have they now? The Duke's expression remained neutral. And you think this is such a scheme? I think, the Countess said carefully, that we should not let emotion override reason. The wine should be tested, as you suggested. Until then, all possibilities remain open. It was a diplomatic answer, committing to nothing. Aurora understood she would find no ally there. The Duke gestured to the footman. Collect the wine. The tablecloth as well. I want everything analyzed. He turned to Lord Ravencourt, who had been standing frozen near the entrance to the dining hall. With your permission, of course. Lord Ravencourt, looking as though he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes, nodded mutely. His carefully planned dinner had just become the scandal of the season. As for you, the Duke said, focusing once more on Aurora, you'll remain here as my guest until this matter is resolved. I won't have you disappearing before we have answers. Guest or prisoner? Aurora couldn't tell. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Lady Vivian rose gracefully from her chair. If we're all to be detained by this farce, I at least require more civilized surroundings. The drawing room, perhaps? An excellent suggestion, the Duke agreed. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would adjourn to the drawing room, I'm certain Lord Ravencourt can provide refreshment while we wait for the wine to be properly examined. The crowd began to move reluctantly, still buzzing with shock and speculation. Aurora found herself caught in the current, aware of the space opening around her like water around something toxic. No one wanted to stand too close, to be associated with her scandal. She caught fragments of conversation as people passed. Oh, absolutely mad. Her family will be ruined. Poor thing, clearly disturbed. Clever plot, I'll give her that. In the drawing room, Aurora positioned herself near a window, as far from the crowd as possible. Through the glass, she could see the estate's formal gardens, peaceful and orderly under the rising moon. She wished desperately to be out there, away from the stares and whispers. "Quite the scene you created." The voice was male, cultured, and vaguely amused. Aurora turned to find a man in his early 30s regarding her with open curiosity. He had the look of minor nobility, expensive clothes, confident bearing, but lacking the overwhelming presence of true power. "I didn't intend to create a scene," Aurora said quietly. "I intended to prevent a murder." "Did you?" He studied her face as if she were a particularly interesting puzzle. "Or did you, as suggested, intend to force the Duke's attention onto yourself through the most dramatic means possible?" "I know what I saw." "What?" Memory is a funny thing, especially under stress. The mind can convince itself of nearly anything. He extended his hand. "Sir Edmund Fairfax, by the way, and I'm not actually accusing you of anything, simply observing that truth is often more complex than it appears." Aurora shook his hand mechanically. "Are you a philosopher, Sir Edmund?" "A lawyer, actually, which amounts to much the same thing, I suppose." His smile was slight. "I'm also genuinely curious whether you're the bravest or most foolish person in this room, possibly both." Before Aurora could respond, the Duke's voice cut through the ambient chatter. "Lady Aurora, a word, if you please." The room went quiet again. These people seemed to exist in a perpetual state of eavesdropping. Aurora crossed to where the Duke stood near the fireplace, very aware of every eye following her movement. Up close, the Duke was even more imposing than she'd realized. He had a full head on her, and his presence seemed to compress the air around him, making it difficult to breathe normally. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Every detail." Aurora gathered her thoughts, forcing herself to recall the sequence clearly. Lady Vivian was laughing at something the Chancellor said. As she reached for her wine with her right hand, her left hand moved over your glass. I saw her palm open slightly, tilting. It was brief, perhaps 2 seconds, but deliberate, practiced. Then she withdrew her hand and the motion was complete. "You're certain it was my glass she touched, not her own?" "Absolutely certain. The angle was wrong for her own glass." The Duke nodded slowly, his expression revealing nothing. "You understand what you've done, what this accusation means." "I understand that if I'm wrong, I've destroyed my family's social standing and likely any future prospects. If I'm right," Aurora met his gaze directly. "If I'm right, I've saved your life, and someone tried to kill you at a public dinner, which suggests desperation or supreme confidence. Possibly both. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. Most people would have chosen silence, self-preservation. Most people didn't watch you reach for a poisoned glass. And yet you barely know me. I could be the villain in someone else's story. Perhaps I deserve poisoning." Aurora shook her head. "No one deserves to be murdered, and whatever you are, you deserve the chance to face your enemies honestly, not die from hidden treachery." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're either remarkably principled or remarkably naive. Can't I be both?" That drew an unexpected reaction, not quite a smile, but a slight softening around his eyes. "I suppose you can. Tell me, Lady Aurora, do you have any idea what you've walked into?" "I'm beginning to suspect it's far more complicated than simple poison." "Perceptive." The Duke glanced across the room to where Lady Vivian held court among a cluster of sympathetic nobles, her expression one of brave suffering under false accusation. "Lady Vivian Ashford is not merely a wealthy widow. She's connected to half the powerful families in England. Her late husband's shipping empire controls trade routes throughout the Mediterranean. She has the ear of ministers, members of parliament, and yes, the king himself." "So accusing her is political suicide?" "For most people, yes. But you've already committed to this path, and I—" He paused, considering. "I choose to believe you." The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through Aurora's understanding of the situation. "You believe me?" "I do." The Duke's voice was firm, final. "Which means we have a problem. If the wine is indeed poisoned, someone powerful enough to act with impunity just tried to kill me. And they'll need to ensure you're discredited or eliminated before you can cause them further difficulty." Aurora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Eliminated? Discredited first, certainly. Your reputation destroyed, your family ruined, your word turned into a cautionary tale about ambition and delusion. But if that proves insufficient, the Duke let the implication hang. Then I've painted a target on my back by saving yours. Precisely, which is why I'm going to make you an offer, Lady Aurora Vale. The Duke's expression was intense, focused. An alliance. You've chosen to stand with me, intentionally or not. So I will stand with you. Together, we'll uncover who wants me dead and why. And we'll ensure they face justice for their attempt. Aurora stared at him, aware that accepting this offer would irrevocably change everything. She would be binding herself to the most dangerous man in English high society, entering a world of political intrigue and deadly games she barely understood. But the alternative was to face the coming storm alone, and she was honest enough to admit she wouldn't survive it. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Your eyes, your observations. You noticed what no one else did. That suggests a particular kind of attention to detail. I need someone who can see the patterns others miss." The Duke glanced toward the door where a footman was entering with obvious urgency. "And I suspect we're about to have our first answer." The footman approached, bowed, and whispered something to the Duke. Aurora watched his expression harden into something cold and sharp. "Well," he said quietly, turning back to her, "it seems you were correct. The wine contains significant quantities of belladonna, enough to kill within hours. Painful, but appearing natural enough to pass for heart failure in a man of my supposed temperament." Aurora felt vindicated and terrified in equal measure. "So now what?" "Now," the Duke said, raising his voice so the entire room could hear, "we have proof that someone attempted to poison me tonight, and we have Lady Aurora Vale to thank for preventing my death." The room exploded into shocked conversation. Aurora saw Lady Vivian's face pale, saw her recover quickly, wrapping herself in wounded dignity. "This is absurd," she declared. "Anyone could have tampered with that wine. The footmen, the kitchen staff. Why focus on me simply because some hysterical girl made an accusation?" "Because," the Duke said calmly, "Lady Aurora described the exact method by which the poison was administered. A method she couldn't have known unless she witnessed it directly. Or unless she administered it herself." Marcus Thorne stepped forward, his expression triumphant. "Think about it. She's the one who knocked over the glass. She could have added the poison then, creating this entire spectacle to make herself seem heroic." "It was a clever deflection," Aurora admitted, and from the murmurs rippling through the crowd, it was finding purchase. The Duke, however, simply smiled, and there was nothing warm in that expression. "An interesting theory, except that Lady Aurora was seated at a different table, under observation by multiple witnesses, and had no access to my wine before she struck the glass. Unless you're suggesting she's capable of poisoning wine from across the room through sheer force of will?" Marcus's face reddened. "I'm suggesting we shouldn't leap to conclusions based on evidence." The Duke's voice turned glacial. "We have poisoned wine. We have an eyewitness account. We have a suspect with clear access and opportunity. What we lack is motive, though I suspect that will emerge soon enough." Lady Vivian drew herself up, her expression one of offended nobility. "I will not stand here and be accused of attempted murder by some nobody fortune hunter and a Duke who apparently has lost all sense of proportion. Lord Ravencourt, I demand you address this outrage." Their host looked profoundly uncomfortable, caught between the Duke's power and Lady Vivian's influence. Perhaps we should involve the authorities? Let proper investigation determine the truth?" "An excellent suggestion," the Duke agreed. "I'm certain the authorities will be very interested in Lady Vivian's financial situation, specifically the rather dramatic losses her shipping company has sustained over the past year. 3 vessels lost, I believe? And wasn't there some difficulty with Mediterranean pirates who seemed remarkably well informed about your routes?" Lady Vivian's composure cracked for just an instant, a flash of genuine fear crossing her features before she mastered it. "Those losses are simply the hazards of maritime trade. They have nothing to do with your desperate need for funds." The Duke's voice was relentless. I wonder what other debts might surface under proper scrutiny. What obligations might drive a woman of your standing to resort to poison? The room had gone silent, watching this confrontation like spectators at a deadly duel. Aurora realized she was witnessing the Duke at work, not the social facade he presented, but the ruthless strategist who had destroyed rivals and built an empire of influence. Lady Vivian's eyes glittered with something dark and dangerous. You'll regret this, Alistair. You think you're untouchable, but you've made enemies. More than you know. This isn't over. I never imagined it was. The Duke's expression remained coldly pleasant. Do give my regards to your associates. Tell them I'm very interested in meeting them. Soon. Lady Vivian turned and swept from the room, her exit dramatic, even in defeat. A cluster of her supporters followed, leaving a vacuum of uncomfortable silence. Countess Blackwood approached, her dark gaze moving between the Duke and Aurora. This is an incredibly dangerous game you're playing, Alistair. I didn't start it, he replied, but I intend to finish it. And her? The Countess nodded toward Aurora. What role does she play in your finishing? Lady Aurora is under my protection. I'd suggest that anyone considering moving against her remember that fact. The Countess's lips quirked in something that might have been amusement or concern. Protection. How very medieval of you. She inclined her head to Aurora. You've made a powerful enemy tonight, child. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. I'm not, Aurora admitted honestly, but I'm learning quickly. That did draw a genuine smile from the Countess. Good. You'll need to. She turned back to the Duke. I'll put word in the right ears. It won't stop the scandal, but it might prevent the worst of the fallout. What you do with that window is your concern. As the Countess moved away, Aurora found herself alone with the Duke again. The other guests were beginning to drift out, the evening irrevocably ruined, gossip already spreading like wildfire. You should know, Aurora said quietly, that I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not trained for intrigue or politics. I just saw something wrong and reacted. I know. The Duke's expression was unreadable. But you're honest. In this world, that's rarer than diamonds and more dangerous than poison. People like Lady Vivian have spent years building webs of deception. You walked in and tore through those webs without even realizing it. And now? Now we see who else comes crawling out when their webs are disturbed. He offered her his arm, a formal gesture that, in this context, was a public declaration. Come, I'll escort you home. Tomorrow we begin unraveling this conspiracy in earnest. As they walked through the now empty halls of the Ravencourt estate, Aurora felt the weight of what she'd set in motion. She'd saved a man's life and likely destroyed her own prospects in the process. She'd allied herself with the most dangerous noble in England and made an enemy of a woman with vast resources and even vaster reach. But as they emerged into the cool night air, the Duke's presence steady and solid beside her, Aurora discovered something surprising. She wasn't afraid. She was angry. Someone had tried to commit murder and nearly succeeded. Someone had counted on silence and complicity to protect them. Well, Aurora thought as the Duke's carriage rolled up, they'd counted wrong. The game had only just begun, and this time the outsider was playing for keeps. The morning newspapers arrived like a plague. Aurora sat in her family's modest drawing room, still wearing her dressing gown, as her father silently placed the stack of papers on the table before her. She didn't need to read them to know what they contained. The headlines were visible through the thin paper, screaming her name in bold type. Scandal at Ravencourt, Duke's life saved by mystery woman or elaborate hoax? Lady Aurora Vale, heroine or attention-seeking fraud? Poison plot or publicity stunt? Society divided over shocking dinner incident. Her father, Thomas Vale, was a big man who'd made his fortune through shrewd investments and tireless work. He'd weathered market crashes, labor strikes, and cutthroat competition. But as he stood there now, his face gray with exhaustion, Aurora realized she'd accomplished what no business rival had managed. She'd broken him. Tell me it's not as bad as it looks, he said quietly. Aurora picked up the top paper, forcing herself to read. The article was vicious, painting her as a calculating social climber who'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to force herself into the Duke's attention. It quoted anonymous sources, describing her as desperate, her family as nouveau riche pretenders, her accusation against Lady Vivian as slander motivated by jealousy. "It's worse," she admitted. "They're calling me everything from delusional to dangerous." Her mother, Elizabeth, appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. "The Merryweathers sent our invitation back for the garden party next week. They didn't even include a note, just sent it back unopened." "The Ashtons did the same," her father said heavily. "And Lord Pemberton's secretary delivered a message this morning. Our business arrangement regarding the Northern Rail expansion is under review, which means it's dead." Aurora felt each word like a stone added to a weight pressing down on her chest. This was exactly what the Duke had warned would happen. Her reputation destroyed, her family's carefully built social position crumbling, all their prospects vanishing like morning mist. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I saw someone about to die and I acted. I couldn't just—" "You could have looked away," her mother said, her voice breaking. "You could have stayed silent. That's what everyone does in that world. They protect themselves first. But you had to be noble. You had to be righteous. And now we're all paying the price." The words cut deeper than any newspaper article. Aurora had spent her entire life watching her parents work themselves to exhaustion, building something from nothing, clawing their way toward respectability. And she'd destroyed it all in one impulsive moment. "Elizabeth," her father said softly, "that's enough." "Is it? Is it enough?" Her mother's composure shattered completely. "We've lost everything, Thomas, everything we built. Our invitations are being returned, our business partners are abandoning us, and our daughter is being called a fraud in every newspaper in London. When is it enough?" A knock at the door interrupted the painful scene. Their butler, looking profoundly uncomfortable, entered with a silver tray bearing a single card. "A visitor, sir, the Duke of Crown. He's waiting in the entrance hall." The room went silent. Aurora's father took the card, studied it, then looked at his daughter with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Did you know he was coming?" "No?" Aurora stood, smoothing her dressing gown with hands that trembled slightly. "But I'm not surprised. He said we were allies now." "Allies." Her mother laughed bitterly. "That man is a predator, Aurora. Whatever he wants from you, it won't be worth what it costs." But Aurora was already moving toward the door, driven by something she didn't fully understand, a need to face this next challenge head-on rather than cower from it. She found the Duke standing in their modest entrance hall, looking impossibly out of place among the middle-class furnishings. He dressed more casually than last night, though his idea of casual still involved tailoring that probably cost more than their entire household budget. When he saw Aurora, still in her dressing gown with her hair unpinned, he had the grace not to comment. "Forgive the early intrusion," he said, "but I thought you should see these before the scandal sheets get hold of them." He handed her a leather folder. Inside were documents, financial records, shipping manifests, correspondence. Aurora scanned them quickly, her mind racing to process the information. "Lady Vivian's company," she said slowly. "These losses, they're catastrophic. She's not just in debt, she's bankrupt." "Effectively, yes. She's been hiding it well, maintaining appearances through increasingly desperate measures. But 3 months ago, she approached several investors seeking capital. All refused her." The Duke's expression was grim. "Including me." Aurora looked up sharply. "She came to you for money?" "She did. Quite a substantial sum. When I declined, she made certain suggestions. Implied that a financial partnership might become something more personal. I declined that as well." He paused. "Less diplomatically than I perhaps should have." "So she had motive, revenge and desperation." Aurora closed the folder. "But this alone won't convince society. They'll say you fabricated these documents to protect me." "I know, which is why I need you to understand what we're actually fighting." The Duke gestured to the folder. "This isn't about one woman trying to poison me. Lady Vivian is connected to a network of nobles who've been systematically manipulating markets, destroying competitors, and consolidating power. My refusal to join them made me a target." Aurora felt the scope of the situation expanding, becoming something far more dangerous than a simple murder attempt. "You're saying there's a conspiracy?" "I'm saying there's a shadow government operating within our own aristocracy, and they're very good at protecting their interests, which includes destroying anyone who threatens them. The Duke's gray eyes held hers. They'll come after you now, Aurora. Not just your reputation. They'll target your family's businesses, your father's investments, everything you care about. They'll make an example of you. They already are. Aurora gestured toward the drawing room where the newspapers waited. Have you seen what they're printing? I wrote most of those stories myself. Aurora stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You what? I control several newspapers through intermediaries. I planted stories painting you as either heroic or controversial, nothing in between. I'm forcing people to choose sides. The Duke's expression was calculating, strategic. A unified condemnation would destroy you, but a divided society? That we can work with. You're using me as bait, Aurora realized, anger flashing through her shock. You're making me the center of controversy to draw out your enemies. I'm giving you a fighting chance, the Duke corrected. If everyone dismissed you as a fraud, you'd have no platform, no voice, no way to defend yourself. This way you have supporters, even if they're outnumbered. It's not ideal, but it's survivable. Aurora wanted to be furious, wanted to throw his manipulation back in his face, but she also recognized the brutal logic of his strategy. He was right. Total condemnation would have been the end. Controversy at least left room for redemption. What do you need me to do? She asked. Attend the Worthington Ball tomorrow night, with me, as my guest. The request landed like a thunderbolt. Aurora's mind reeled at the implications. That's social suicide for both of us. It's a declaration, the Duke countered. I'm telling society that I stand with you, that I believe your account, and that I'm not intimidated by whoever's orchestrating this campaign against us. It will force our enemies to escalate, to make mistakes. It will also destroy any remaining support I have. The people who might have defended me will abandon me the moment I'm seen as your, what, mistress, protege? My ally, the Duke said firmly. Nothing more, nothing less. Though I won't pretend society will see it that way. They'll assume the worst, they always do. But Aurora, we're past the point of protecting your reputation through conventional means. That battle is lost. The question now is whether we go forward together and fight, or whether you retreat and let them win. Aurora thought of her mother's tears, her father's defeated expression, the returned invitations and canceled contracts. She thought of Lady Vivian's practiced hand slipping poison into wine, of the conspiracy the Duke described, of all the people who would suffer if these shadow players weren't exposed. I'll need a dress, she said quietly. Something suitable for war. The Duke's smile was sharp and approving. I'll have my dressmaker sent over. She's discreet and fast. You'll be stunning. After he left, Aurora returned to the drawing room where her parents waited. Her father looked at her with resignation, her mother with barely suppressed fury. You're going with him, her mother said flatly, to the Worthington Ball. I am. Then you've chosen to complete our destruction. Do you understand that? The moment you appear on his arm, we're finished. No decent family will receive us. Your father's business partners will flee. We'll be pariahs. We're already pariahs, Mother. The invitations are being returned, the contracts canceled. This didn't start with my decision to attend a ball. It started the moment I stopped a murder. Aurora met her mother's gaze steadily. I can either hide and let them destroy us slowly, or I can fight back and maybe, just maybe, take some of them down with us. Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then, what does the Duke want from you, Aurora? Really? The truth. And someone brave enough or foolish enough to help him expose it. And you believe him? You trust him? Aurora considered the question carefully. I trust that our interests align. He wants to destroy a conspiracy that tried to kill him. I want to clear my name and protect this family. Whether I trust his motives beyond that, she shrugged. I'm not sure it matters. I've already made my choice. Her father nodded slowly. Then we'll support you. Your mother and I will weather whatever comes. But Aurora, if this man betrays you, if he uses you and discards you, I'll find a way to make him pay. Duke or not. It was the most threatening thing Aurora had ever heard her gentle father say, and she loved him fiercely for it. The dressmaker arrived that afternoon. a severe Frenchwoman named Marguerite, who took one look at Aurora and began issuing rapid-fire instructions in heavily accented English. The dress she produced was a masterpiece, deep emerald silk that brought out Aurora's eyes, cut in a style that was both elegant and slightly daring. Not scandalous, but enough to signal that Aurora wasn't cowering. "The Duke, he has good eye," Marguerite observed as she pinned the final adjustments. "He knows what makes a woman look powerful, dangerous. This is what you need, yes? To look like you belong in their world, even as you set it on fire." Aurora studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable, poised, elegant, ready for battle. "Yes," she agreed, "that's exactly what I need." The next evening, as Aurora prepared for the ball, a messenger arrived with a package. Inside was a necklace, emerald set in silver, clearly antique and breathtakingly beautiful. The note was brief. "These belong to my mother. She would have liked you. Wear them tonight. AC." Aurora fastened the necklace with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of the Duke's trust settling around her throat like armor. When his carriage arrived, her parents stood at the door to see her off. Her mother's eyes were still disapproving, but her father squeezed Aurora's hand. "Come back to us," he said simply. "I will. One way or another." The Duke was waiting in the carriage, dressed in formal black that made him look like an elegant predator. His eyes widened fractionally when he saw the necklace. "They suit you," he said quietly. "Better than they ever suited her, if I'm honest. Your mother was beautiful, from what I've heard. She was cold, calculating, everything a duchess should be." The Duke's expression was unreadable. "You're nothing like her, which is why those emeralds look right on you. They needed warmth to bring them to life." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, made Aurora blush. She covered it by adjusting her gloves. "What should I expect tonight?" Hostility, open stares, whispered insults, possibly a few brave souls who will approach to satisfy their curiosity. The Duke's tone was clinical, preparing her like a general briefing a soldier. "Lady Vivian will be there. The Worthingtons are old family friends. She'll have gathered supporters, people who believe her version of events. They'll try to humiliate you to make you flee in shame. And if I don't flee, then they'll escalate, which is what we want. People who are angry make mistakes. But Aurora, you need to understand something." He turned to face her fully. "Once we walk into that ballroom together, there's no going back. Your reputation will be permanently linked to mine. Whatever happens to me will happen to you. If I fall, you fall with me." Aurora thought of the poison in the wine glass, of Lady Vivian's practiced hand, of the conspiracy the Duke had described. She thought of her mother's tears and her father's quiet strength. She thought of all the people who would suffer if no one stood up to the powerful predators who manipulated society for their own gain. "Then we'd better not fall," she said. The Duke's smile was fierce and approving. "Indeed." The Worthington estate blazed with light, every window glowing like a beacon. Carriages lined the drive, disgorging guests in their finest attire. Aurora felt her courage waver as the carriage rolled to a stop. Beyond those doors waited judgment, condemnation, and enemies who wanted nothing more than to see her destroyed. The Duke offered his arm. "Ready?" "No, but I'm going anyway." They ascended the steps together, and Aurora heard the precise moment when the crowd inside recognized them. The chatter died like a candle flame snuffed out, replaced by shocked silence. Lady Worthington stood at the entrance to the ballroom, her expression frozen somewhere between horror and fascination. "Your Grace, Lady Aurora, how unexpected." "Is it?" The Duke's tone was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. "I sent my acceptance weeks ago, and Lady Aurora is my guest. I trust that won't be a problem." It was a trap, beautifully laid. Turning them away would be an unforgivable insult to a duke. Allowing them entry would be seen as endorsing Aurora's version of events. Lady Worthington was caught, and she knew it. "Of course not," she managed. "Please, do come in." They entered the ballroom, and Aurora felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turning toward them. The silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then the whispers began. a susurrus of shock and scandal that spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. She actually came, the audacity, on his arm, no less. Shameless. The Duke led Aurora directly into the center of the ballroom, claiming the most visible position possible. It was a deliberate provocation, forcing everyone to acknowledge their presence, to choose whether to approach or avoid them. Most chose avoidance. Aurora watched as groups of people she'd dined with, danced with, made polite conversation with, turned their backs in a carefully choreographed display of disapproval. It was social murder, performed with impeccable manners. But not everyone turned away. Sir Edmund Fairfax, the lawyer she'd met at Ravencourt, approached with a slight smile. "Lady Aurora, Your Grace, how delightful to see you both alive and well. I understand congratulations are in order. A poisoning thwarted is no small accomplishment." "You believe her story, then?" The Duke's tone was neutral, but Aurora sensed he was assessing the man. "I believe in evidence, and evidence supports her account, which makes this entire display rather fascinating from a legal perspective." Edmund gestured subtly to the crowd. "Watch them, Your Grace. The way people position themselves, who stands with whom. It's a map of alliances and fears, very instructive." Before the Duke could respond, another figure approached, Countess Eleanor Blackwood, resplendent in black silk that matched her dark eyes. "Alistair, Lady Aurora." The Countess's gaze swept over them both, assessing, calculating. "You're causing quite a stir." "That was rather the point," the Duke said mildly. "And what do you hope to accomplish with this demonstration?" "Truth, justice, the usual tedious necessities." The Countess's lips quirked. "You're gambling with high stakes." "If you're wrong about Lady Vivian, if Aurora fabricated this entire incident, you'll both be destroyed. Your reputation, Your Grace, won't survive being made a fool of." "I'm not wrong," Aurora interjected, "and I didn't fabricate anything." "So you say. But can you prove it? Really prove it, beyond the poisoned wine? Can you show intent, opportunity, motive in a way that satisfies the court of public opinion?" The Countess's expression was sympathetic but skeptical. "Because that's what you're facing, child. Not a legal trial, but something far more vicious, the judgment of your peers." As if summoned by those words, Lady Vivian appeared. She moved through the crowd like a queen in exile, surrounded by a coterie of supporters who radiated righteous indignation on her behalf. She wore white, a deliberate choice, Aurora realized, signaling innocence and virtue. "Alistair," Lady Vivian said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom, "I had hoped you would come to your senses, that you would recognize how you've been manipulated by this person." "Person?" The Duke's tone turned icy. "You mean Lady Aurora Vale, daughter of Thomas Vale, who saved my life when you tried to poison me? Yes, I know exactly who she is." "You know what she wants you to believe," Lady Vivian countered smoothly. "A young woman of no consequence, desperate for attention and status, who saw an opportunity and seized it. She created a scene, made wild accusations, and you, for reasons I cannot fathom, chose to believe her over me. I chose to believe the evidence. Evidence can be fabricated. Wine can be poisoned after the fact. Testimony can be coached." Lady Vivian's eyes were hard despite her gentle tone. "You're being used, Alistair. And this charade, bringing her here, displaying her on your arm like a trophy, only proves how thoroughly she's deceived you." Aurora felt the crowd's attention like a physical pressure, all those eyes watching to see how she'd respond to these accusations. She could feel the Duke's tension beside her, coiled and ready, but she knew this moment required her voice, not his. "You're right about one thing," Aurora said clearly, her voice carrying through the silent room. "I am a person of no consequence. I have no title, no great lineage, no powerful family connections. All I have is what I saw, your hand over the Duke's wine glass, the subtle motion, the practiced ease. I had everything to lose by speaking up and nothing to gain. Why would I fabricate something that would destroy me?" "Ambition," Lady Vivian answered immediately. "The desperate need to be noticed, to matter, to rise above your station. You saw the Duke as your ticket to power, and you manufactured a crisis to force his attention. If I wanted the Duke's attention, there are far easier ways to get it than accusing one of the most powerful women in England of attempted murder. Aurora's voice remained steady. Your theory requires me to be simultaneously brilliant enough to execute this complex scheme, yet stupid enough not to realize it would destroy me. Which is it, Lady Vivian? Am I a criminal mastermind or a foolish girl? The question landed solidly, and Aurora saw doubt flicker across some faces in the crowd. But Lady Vivian wasn't finished. What I know, she said, her voice turning cold, is that my reputation, built over 40 years of impeccable conduct, is being destroyed by a nobody who has been in society for barely 2 seasons. And the Duke, instead of defending a woman of his own class, has chosen to champion this interloper. Interloper, Aurora repeated. Is that what I am? Because I thought social mobility was one of England's great principles. Or is that only acceptable when it benefits people like you? You're twisting my words. I'm clarifying them. You want to paint me as an outsider, someone who doesn't belong, who shouldn't be believed because of my background, rather than the evidence. But that's exactly what makes my testimony credible. I had no reason to lie. I had every reason to stay silent. And I chose truth over self-preservation. How very noble, Lady Vivian said acidly. And convenient that your truth happens to align perfectly with the Duke's interests. My interests, the Duke interjected, his voice cutting through the tension, are in not being murdered. Lady Aurora ensured that outcome. For that, she has my gratitude and my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. I trust that's clear enough? The warning was unmistakable, and Aurora felt the atmosphere in the room shift. The Duke had just declared open war on anyone who moved against her. It was protection, yes, but it was also a target painted on both their backs. Lady Vivian's smile was sharp as broken glass. Crystal clear, Your Grace. Though I wonder how long your gratitude will last when the full cost of this alliance becomes apparent. She turned and swept away, her supporters following like the train of a wedding dress. But as she passed Aurora, she leaned in close enough to whisper, You've just signed your family's death warrant, girl. Enjoy your moment of triumph. It won't last. Aurora held her ground, refused to flinch, refused to let the threat show on her face, but inside ice formed around her heart. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her family was in danger. Real, immediate danger. The ball continued, but Aurora moved through it in a haze, hyper-aware of every stare, every whispered comment, every turned back. The Duke remained at her side, a solid presence, but even his protection couldn't entirely shield her from the social brutality being inflicted. Then Marcus Thorne appeared, drunk enough to be reckless. Well, well, the heroic Lady Aurora. Tell me, was it worth it, destroying your family's prospects for one night in the Duke's bed? The accusation was crude enough to draw gasps from nearby listeners. The Duke moved, but Aurora caught his arm, stopping him. This insult was hers to answer. I'm not in the Duke's bed, she said clearly. I'm at his side. There's a difference, though I wouldn't expect you to understand it. Everyone knows what you are, Marcus sneered. A jumped-up merchant's daughter playing at nobility. You think one dramatic gesture makes you one of us? You'll never belong here. You're right, Aurora said quietly. I'll never belong in a world where people like you are considered the standard. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. The response clearly wasn't what Marcus expected. He flushed an ugly red. You impudent little... That's enough. The Duke's voice was soft, dangerous. You've had too much to drink, Thorne. I suggest you leave before you say something you'll regret. Regret? The only thing I regret is that someone didn't poison you years ago when... He never finished the sentence. The Duke's fist connected with Marcus's jaw in a blow that was economical, precise, and devastatingly effective. Marcus went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Women screamed, men shouted, and Lord Worthington came rushing over, his face purple with rage. Your Grace, this is completely unacceptable. I must ask you to leave immediately. I was just about to suggest the same thing, the Duke said calmly, though Aurora could see his knuckles were bleeding. The company has become rather tiresome. He offered Aurora his arm again. Shall we? Aurora took it, and together they walked through the parted crowd toward the exit. Behind them, she heard the explosion of conversation, the scandalized reactions, the gleeful spreading of this fresh outrage. In the carriage, the Duke examined his bleeding hand with clinical detachment. Aurora found a handkerchief and began wrapping it without being asked. "That was reckless," she said quietly. "He insulted you and implied he wished me dead. I thought my response was measured, all things considered." "You just gave them more ammunition. They'll say you're violent, unstable, that I've corrupted you." "Aurora." The Duke's hand caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I don't care what they say. I care about what's true. And the truth is that you saved my life. You've shown more courage than anyone in that room, and you deserve better than their judgment." The intensity in his gaze made Aurora's breath catch. For a moment she saw past the cold strategist, past the ruthless Duke, to something raw and genuine underneath. Then he released her, settling back in his seat. "Besides, we got what we came for." Lady Vivian revealed her hand. "She's not just defensive, she's actively working to destroy you. That means she's worried, and worried people make mistakes." Aurora finished wrapping his hand, her own trembling slightly. "She threatened my family, explicitly." "I know, I heard." The Duke's expression hardened. "Which means we need to move faster than planned. Tomorrow I'm having my investigators dig into Lady Vivian's associates, every business partner, every political ally, everyone who might be part of this conspiracy. We'll find the connections, the money trail, the proof we need. And in the meantime, you stay close to me. No going anywhere alone, no accepting invitations from anyone we don't absolutely trust. Lady Vivian's threat wasn't idle. She will move against your family if she thinks it will break you." Aurora thought of her parents, of the home she'd grown up in, of everything they'd sacrificed to build a better life. The idea that they might be hurt because of her choice made her feel physically ill. "I should never have involved you in this," the Duke said quietly, reading her expression. "I gave you a choice, but it wasn't really a choice, not when the alternative was total destruction. I manipulated you just as surely as Lady Vivian tried to manipulate me." "No," Aurora's voice was firm. "You gave me the option to fight back. That's more than anyone else offered. I made my choice with open eyes." "Did you? Did you really understand what you were choosing? Because I'm not sure I did. I thought this would be a chess game, move and counter-move, all very civilized. But it's becoming something else, something more dangerous." The carriage rolled to a stop in front of Aurora's home. Inside, she could see lights still burning, her parents waiting up, worried. "Tomorrow," the Duke said, "I'll have guards posted. Discreetly, but they'll be there. Anyone who approaches your family will be watched." "Thank you." Aurora moved to exit, then paused. "Your Grace, Alistair, whatever happens, I don't regret it, any of it. If I had to choose again, I'd do the same thing." His smile was small but genuine. "That's either admirable or insane. I haven't decided which." "Can't it be both?" "With you? Probably." Aurora entered her home to find her parents waiting in the drawing room. Her father took one look at her face and poured 3 glasses of brandy without a word. "That bad?" he asked as he handed her a glass. "Worse, but also, we're still standing. That counts for something." Her mother looked at her with an expression that was equal parts frustration and reluctant pride. "You punched Marcus Thorne, I assume?" "Actually, the Duke did that. I just insulted him verbally." Her father laughed, a sound with little humor in it. "Well, at least you're learning to delegate." "What now?" "Now we prepare for war, because that's what this has become." In the days that followed, the consequences of that ball played out across London society like a slow-motion explosion. The Duke's assault on Marcus Thorne became the scandal of the season, with some defending it as righteous anger and others condemning it as aristocratic violence. Aurora's name was dragged through every newspaper, her character dissected, her motives questioned, her very existence debated as if she were a theoretical problem rather than a real person. But beneath the social warfare, something else was happening. The Duke's investigators began finding threads, financial connections between Lady Vivian and several powerful nobles, irregular transactions, coded correspondence. Nothing definitive yet, but enough to suggest that the conspiracy was real and larger than they'd imagined. And then, 6 days after the Worthington ball, Aurora's father's main warehouse burned to the ground. The fire started at midnight, spreading so fast the watchmen barely escaped with their lives. By morning, there was nothing left but smoldering ruins and the acrid smell of destroyed dreams. The insurance company, citing suspicious circumstances, refused to pay out immediately, launching an investigation. Aurora stood in front of the ruins, her father beside her, both of them silent in the face of such comprehensive destruction. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No." Her father's voice was firm despite the devastation before them. "This is their fault. Whoever did this, they're the criminals, not you." The Duke arrived within the hour, his expression grim. "I have people investigating. We'll find who's responsible." "We already know who's responsible," Aurora said, staring at the blackened timbers. "The only question is whether we can prove it." "Then we'll prove it." "Aurora, I promise you, don't." She turned to face him, and her eyes were hard, angry, determined. "Don't promise me anything. Just help me destroy them. All of them. Every person who thought they could do this and face no consequences. I want them brought down, exposed, ruined. Can you do that?" The Duke studied her face, seeing something new there. Not the idealistic girl who'd saved his life, but someone harder, someone forged in the fire of betrayal and loss. "Yes," he said simply. "I can do that. But Aurora, once we start down this path, once we commit to total war, there's no mercy, no quarter, no pulling back. We go until they're destroyed or we are. Are you certain?" Aurora looked at the ruins of her father's warehouse, thought of Lady Vivian's whispered threat, remembered every insult, and turned back in casual cruelty inflicted by people who believed themselves untouchable. "I'm certain," she said. "Let's burn their world down." The Duke's private study was located in the east wing of his London residence, a room that spoke of power accumulated over generations. Maps covered one wall, tracking trade routes and political boundaries. Another held floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes on law, history, and military strategy. In the center, a massive oak desk bore the scars of decades of use, its surface currently covered with documents, ledgers, and correspondence that represented the accumulated evidence of their investigation. Aurora stood before that desk, her hands pressed flat against its surface, studying the web of connections they'd uncovered over the past 2 weeks. Red strings on the map connected names, dates, transactions, a visual representation of the conspiracy that had tried to kill the Duke and was now systematically destroying her family. "Here," she said, tapping a notation. "Lord Pemberton's coal interests. He sold a controlling share to a shell company 3 months ago, the same shell company that purchased Lady Vivian's Mediterranean shipping contracts." The Duke moved beside her, his presence solid and focused. Since the warehouse fire, their working relationship had shifted into something more intense, driven by shared purpose and mounting pressure. They spent hours together like this, hunting through financial records and coded messages, looking for the pattern that would reveal their enemies. "And the shell company traces back to whom?" he asked, though Aurora suspected he already knew. "That's where it gets interesting. The ownership is layered through several intermediaries, but my contact at the registry office, who owes my father a favor, found the original incorporation papers." Aurora pulled out a document, pointing to a signature. "Chancellor Hastings, the king's own representative." The Duke went very still. "You're certain?" "The signature matches other documents we've verified. And look at the timing. The shell company was created 2 days after you refused Lady Vivian's request for investment." Aurora met his gaze. "This isn't just about her bankruptcy. This is about a coordinated effort by some of the most powerful people in England to consolidate control. You were an obstacle. I was collateral damage." "No." The Duke's voice was hard. "You were a threat the moment you saw through their deception. They can't allow a witness who can't be bought or intimidated. Your testimony makes you dangerous." Before Aurora could respond, the door opened and Sir Edmund Fairfax entered, carrying another stack of documents. The lawyer had become an unexpected ally, his analytical mind proving invaluable in tracing the conspiracy's financial threads. "I have the shipping manifest you requested," Edmund said, spreading papers across the desk. And you're going to want to see this. 3 of Lady Vivian's ships that were supposedly lost to pirates? They're still operating under different names, different registries, but the hull numbers match. They weren't destroyed. They were sold. Aurora felt a surge of vindication mixed with dread. Sold to whom? A French consortium with ties to several English nobles, including Marcus Thorne's family. Edmund's expression was grim. They staged the losses, claimed insurance payouts, and pocketed both the insurance money and the sale price. It's fraud on a massive scale. And everyone involved needed Lady Vivian's debts to look legitimate, the Duke said slowly, pieces clicking together. If her financial difficulties were exposed as manufactured, the entire scheme unravels, which is why my refusal to invest threatened more than just her pride. It threatened to expose a network of criminals operating at the highest levels of society. Aurora's mind raced ahead. So when I witnessed the poisoning attempt, I became a problem for everyone involved. Not just Lady Vivian, but Chancellor Hastings, Lord Pemberton, Marcus Thorne, and whoever else is part of this network. They need me discredited or dead. Hence the warehouse fire, Edmund concluded, designed to intimidate you into silence or destroy you financially so you can't afford to continue fighting. The Duke turned to Aurora, his expression intense. We have enough now. Enough to take to the authorities to force an investigation. It won't be easy. These people have influence, connections. But the evidence is compelling. We can end this. But Aurora was shaking her head, her mind working through the implications. No. If we go to the authorities now, they'll close ranks. They'll use their influence to bury the investigation, discredit the evidence, and destroy anyone who helped us gather it. Edmund could be disbarred. Your investigators could be arrested for theft or bribery. We'd be crushed before we ever got close to justice. Then what do you suggest? The Duke's tone indicated he already suspected her answer. We force them into the open. We make them act against us in a way that can't be hidden or explained away. We need witnesses, undeniable proof, a situation where their guilt is so obvious that even their allies can't protect them. Aurora straightened, her decision crystallizing. We need to set a trap. Edmund looked between them, understanding dawning. A trap that uses what as bait? Me, Aurora said simply, and the Duke. Together, in a way that forces them to show their hand completely. The Duke studied her face for a long moment. You're talking about the announcement dinner next week, the one I've been delaying. Aurora hadn't been talking about that specifically, but now that he mentioned it, the pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The Duke had been planning a formal dinner for weeks, a social obligation to maintain political relationships, scheduled before the poisoning attempt had upended everything. He'd postponed it twice already, but couldn't delay indefinitely without appearing weak. It's perfect, she said, her strategic mind engaging fully. You invite everyone? Lady Vivian, Chancellor Hastings, Lord Pemberton, all the conspirators. They'll come because refusing would be suspicious. And then, in front of all those witnesses, you make an announcement they won't be able to ignore. What announcement? Edmund asked, though his tone suggested he'd already guessed. Aurora looked at the Duke, seeing her own understanding reflected in his gray eyes. They danced around this possibility for weeks now, both recognizing where their alliance was heading, but neither willing to name it explicitly. Marriage, the Duke said quietly. I announce my intention to marry Lady Aurora Vale. The room fell silent. Edmund's eyes widened, but he didn't immediately object, which meant he understood the strategic brilliance of the move. It accomplishes several things, Aurora said, forcing herself to analyze it clinically rather than emotionally. First, it elevates my status beyond anything they can easily attack. As your fiancé, I become untouchable, at least socially. Second, it forces the conspirators to act. They can't allow this marriage because it legitimizes me permanently. They'll have to move against us, and they'll have to do it publicly, with witnesses. Third, the Duke added, it demonstrates that I'm not intimidated, that despite everything, the poison, the social attacks, the warehouse fire, I'm doubling down on my support of you. It's a declaration of war, but one made from a position of strength. It's also incredibly dangerous, Edmund interjected. If they move against you during the dinner itself, If they're desperate enough to try something violent in front of witnesses, then we'll have them, Aurora finished, because that's exactly the mistake we need them to make. Right now, everything they've done has plausible deniability. The poison could have been administered by anyone. The warehouse fire could have been an accident. The financial attacks are just business. But if they try to kill the Duke, or me, in front of a room full of nobles, there's no explanation that saves them. The Duke's smile was cold and sharp. You're suggesting we deliberately provoke them into attempting murder. I'm suggesting we give them enough rope to hang themselves. They're already committed to stopping us. We're just controlling the when and where. Aurora's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. This plan was insane, reckless, and possibly suicidal. It was also the only strategy that had a real chance of exposing the conspiracy completely. I need to think about this, the Duke said, but Aurora could see in his expression that he was already calculating angles, assessing risks, planning moves and countermoves. Think quickly, she advised. The dinner is in 6 days. If we're doing this, we need time to prepare. Guards positioned carefully, allies briefed, evidence secured in multiple locations in case something happens to us. Edmund cleared his throat. I feel compelled to point out that this plan requires you both to become engaged, publicly, with the full understanding that if this succeeds, you'll be expected to actually marry. Are you both prepared for that? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications neither Aurora nor the Duke had fully confronted. Their alliance had been built on necessity and mutual respect, forged in crisis and sustained by shared purpose. But marriage was something else entirely, a permanent bond that would tie their lives together irrevocably. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary, Aurora said carefully, to see this through, to protect my family and bring these criminals to justice. As am I, the Duke agreed. His gaze met Aurora's, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this was more than strategy now, though neither was ready to name what that more might be. Edmund nodded slowly. Then I'll begin preparations. You'll need a betrothal contract, witnesses to the announcement, and security arrangements that don't appear to be security arrangements. And Aurora, you'll need to be prepared for the social implications. The moment this is announced, you'll be under more scrutiny than ever before. I'm already under constant scrutiny. At least this way, I'll have a reason for it. Over the next 6 days, Aurora watched as the Duke transformed from an isolated power broker into a man orchestrating what might be the most dangerous social event in recent memory. He invited 40 of the most influential nobles in England, including every person they suspected of involvement in the conspiracy. He hired additional staff for the dinner, though Aurora recognized several of them as the Duke's personal guards in livery. He arranged the seating with meticulous care, positioning conspirators where they could be observed, but not so obviously that they'd suspect the setup. And he met with Aurora every day, ostensibly to plan the dinner, but actually to prepare her for what was coming. They'll try to separate us, he told her during one session, both of them standing in his ballroom as he walked her through the evening's choreography. Either through social manipulation, engaging me in conversation while someone else pulls you aside, or more directly, if they're desperate. Stay in the main rooms, don't let anyone isolate you. What if they try to poison the wine again? Aurora asked, the memory of that first dinner still vivid. Different strategy this time. We're having everything served family style, from common dishes. Anything added to one person's portion affects everyone's. It makes targeted poisoning nearly impossible. The Duke gestured to the elaborate table settings being arranged. Plus, we'll have people watching. Edmund will be there, as will Countess Blackwood. She's agreed to attend as a neutral observer. Her presence alone will make overt violence difficult. Unless they're truly desperate, which is what we're counting on. Desperate people make fatal errors. The day before the dinner, Aurora's mother requested a private conversation. They sat in the family's modest drawing room, the burned ruins of the warehouse visible through the window, a constant reminder of what was at stake. You're really going to do this, her mother said. It wasn't a question. You're going to let the Duke announce an engagement that might be your death sentence. It might also be our salvation, Aurora countered. Mother, we're already in danger. The warehouse proved that. This way, at least we're choosing the battlefield. And if it goes wrong? If they kill you or the Duke or both of you? Her mother's voice cracked. Aurora, I can't lose you. Not for this. Not for anything. Aurora took her mother's hands, feeling their roughness from years of work, their strength from years of survival. You raised me to believe that some things are worth fighting for: justice, truth, the right of people to live without fear of being crushed by those more powerful than them. This is that fight, Mother. This is where I make my stand. I raised you to survive, to be smart, to be careful, to know when to fight and when to retreat. Her mother's eyes were wet with unshed tears. And you're choosing to fight a battle you might not win. If I retreat now, we've already lost. They'll destroy us slowly instead of quickly, but the result will be the same. At least this way, we have a chance to take them down with us. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then, your father and I will be there, at the dinner. The Duke sent an invitation this morning. We're not letting you face this alone. Aurora felt emotion surge up, threatening to break through her carefully maintained composure. You don't have to. Yes, we do. You're our daughter. If you're walking into danger, we're walking with you. Her mother's expression was fierce. Besides, someone needs to make sure these aristocrats remember where you came from. That you're not just some pretty decoration on the Duke's arm. You're Thomas Vale's daughter, and we don't back down from bullies. The night of the dinner arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the weather itself was conspiring to make the evening memorable. Aurora dressed with meticulous care, wearing a gown of deep sapphire blue that the Duke had commissioned, another subtle message about her elevated status. The emerald necklace rested against her throat, a visible symbol of the Duke's favor. Her father appeared at her bedroom door, looking uncomfortable in formal attire, but determined. The carriage is here. The Duke sent it for us. Aurora studied her reflection one final time. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable from the uncertain girl who'd attended that first dinner at Ravencourt. This woman's eyes were hard, her spine straight, her expression that of someone who'd been tested by fire and emerged tempered like steel. Let's go to war, she said quietly. The Duke's London residence blazed with light, every window glowing against the darkening sky. Carriages lined the circular drive, disgorging guests in their finest attire. Aurora recognized most of them, the same people who'd turned their backs at the Worthington Ball, who'd whispered about her in drawing rooms, who'd printed lies about her in newspapers. The Duke met them at the entrance, resplendent in formal black that emphasized his height and the sharp planes of his face. But when he looked at Aurora, his expression softened fractionally. You look magnificent, he said quietly, offering his arm. I look terrified, she corrected, taking it anyway. That too. But they don't need to know that. He nodded to her parents. Mr. and Mrs. Vale, thank you for coming. Your presence tonight is a statement in itself. Her father's handshake was firm. We protect our own, Your Grace. Come what may. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into an elegant dining space. A massive table dominated the center, set with crystal and silver that probably cost more than Aurora's childhood home. Guests milled about with champagne, their conversations a low hum of speculation and gossip. Aurora spotted Lady Vivian immediately. The woman stood in a cluster of supporters, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes were hard when they landed on Aurora. Nearby, Chancellor Hastings conversed with Lord Pemberton, both men radiating the comfortable confidence of those who'd never faced real consequences. Marcus Thorne was notably absent, his jaw still healing from the Duke's punch, according to rumor. But his father, Lord Thorne, attended, his expression suggesting he was here for vengeance more than dinner. Everyone's here, Aurora murmured to the Duke. All our suspects. All our targets, he corrected grimly. Remember, stay visible, stay safe, and trust that I won't let anything happen to you. But even as he said it, Aurora knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The dinner began with excruciating formality. Courses arrived and departed, conversation flowed in careful channels, and Aurora felt the weight of hostile attention like a physical thing. She was seated at the Duke's right hand, a position of honor that would have been scandalous weeks ago but now simply confirmed what everyone suspected. Across the table, Lady Vivian picked at her food, her gaze darting between Aurora and the Duke with barely concealed fury. To Aurora's left, her mother sat ramrod straight, intimidated by nothing, while her father engaged Lord Pemberton in conversation about railway investments with a composure that suggested he'd already forgotten about his burned warehouse. "Your father is remarkable," the Duke murmured during a lull in conversation. "He's discussing business with the man who likely ordered that warehouse destroyed, and he's doing it as if nothing happened." "He's a survivor," Aurora replied. "He's been underestimated his entire life. He knows how to use that." The main course arrived, roasted venison with a rich wine reduction. Aurora watched as footmen served from common platters, saw the Duke's guards disguised as servers monitoring every dish, noted the careful choreography designed to prevent another poisoning. But she'd underestimated her enemy's resourcefulness. It was Countess Blackwood who noticed first. The older woman's eyes sharpened on something across the table, and she leaned toward the Duke with a quiet urgency. "Alistair, the wine decanters. Look at the wine decanters." Aurora followed the Countess's gaze and felt ice form in her stomach. The decanters for red wine sat at intervals down the table, crystal vessels filled with deep burgundy liquid. She'd seen footmen pour from them, had watched guests drink without incident, but now, looking more carefully, she noticed something odd about the decanter nearest to her and the Duke. The liquid inside was slightly cloudier than the others, the color just fractionally off. "Don't drink," the Duke said sharply, his hand covering Aurora's wine glass. His voice carried, drawing immediate attention. "No one drink from the center decanters. Now." The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward them. "Your Grace?" Chancellor Hastings' voice was smooth, concerned. "Is something wrong?" "Look at the wine." The Duke stood, gesturing to the suspect decanter. "Compare it to the others. Someone has tampered with it." Lord Pemberton rose as well, his face flushing. "This is outrageous. Are you seriously suggesting that someone poisoned the wine? Here, in front of 40 witnesses?" "I'm suggesting," the Duke said coldly, "that someone is desperate enough to try. Again." Lady Vivian laughed, a sound with sharp edges. "Or perhaps you're so paranoid that you're seeing threats where none exist. Perhaps the heat has affected the wine's appearance. Perhaps your obsession with proving Lady Aurora's wild accusations has driven you to madness." "Then you won't mind if we have it tested," Aurora said, standing beside the Duke. "Right now, in front of everyone." The challenge hung in the air. Around the table, nobles shifted uncomfortably. Some looked genuinely confused. Others, including Lady Vivian, Chancellor Hastings, and Lord Pemberton, had gone very still. "This is ridiculous," Hastings declared. "I won't sit here and be subjected to these theatrical accusations." "Then leave," the Duke interrupted. "But before you do, I have an announcement to make. The reason for this dinner, beyond the pleasure of your company." Aurora felt her heart leap into her throat. This was it. The moment they'd planned, the declaration that would force their enemies to act. The Duke took her hand, the gesture visible to everyone. "I'm sure many of you have speculated about my relationship with Lady Aurora Vale, about why I've chosen to believe her account, to support her publicly, to defend her against baseless attacks." "We've certainly wondered," Lord Thorne said acidly. "Young women of questionable background have employed various strategies to entrap powerful men throughout history." "Entrap?" The Duke's voice turned glacial. "Is that what you think happened? That this woman, who saved my life at tremendous personal cost, who has been slandered and attacked and had her family's livelihood destroyed, is somehow the villain in this story?" "I think," Thorne replied carefully, "that we only have her word about what she claims to have seen, and words can be bought." "Can they? Then perhaps you should have bought hers when you had the chance." The Duke's smile was sharp. "But you made a different choice. You tried to destroy her, to intimidate her into silence, to make an example of her. And instead you revealed exactly what she witnessed, a conspiracy of powerful people who believe themselves above consequence." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Aurora saw panic flash across several faces. Hastings, Pemberton, Lady Vivian. They'd expected accusations, but not this direct assault. "These are dangerous claims, Your Grace," Hastings said, his voice tight. "Accusing members of the peerage of conspiracy without evidence." "Who said I don't have evidence?" The Duke pulled documents from his jacket, spreading them on the table. "Shipping manifests showing Lady Vivian's lost vessels still operating under false registries. financial records connecting you, Chancellor, to fraudulent insurance claims, correspondence between Lord Pemberton and French buyers discussing the sale of distressed assets that were actually functioning ships. Should I continue? Silence. Absolute crushing silence. Lady Vivian recovered first, her expression transforming into something ugly and desperate. You're bluffing. Those documents are forgeries. You've manufactured this entire conspiracy to justify your obsession with that girl. That girl, the Duke said, his voice cutting through her protests, is the woman I intend to marry. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Aurora felt every eye in the room lock onto her, felt the weight of shock and scandal and disbelief pressing down like a physical thing. You cannot be serious, Hastings breathed. You would marry her? A merchant's daughter with no breeding, no connections, no patience for criminals, Aurora interrupted, finding her voice. No tolerance for people who think their titles protect them from justice. No fear of men who believe they can murder and steal and destroy lives without consequence. You have no proof, Lady Vivian hissed. You're a nobody making wild accusations. I have proof of the poison in that decanter, Aurora shot back. And when it's tested, when it's revealed that someone tried to kill the Duke and me tonight in front of all these witnesses, the question becomes who had access, who knew the seating arrangements, who would benefit from our deaths. Lord Pemberton stood abruptly. I won't stay here and listen to this slander. Lord Thorne, Chancellor, I suggest we leave. Sit down. The Duke's voice cracked like a whip. All of you, because here's what's going to happen. That wine will be tested tonight, with witnesses from the medical college standing by. And when it proves to be poisoned, and it will, we're going to discuss who arranged it. We're going to examine every servant who had access to this room, every delivery that arrived today, every person who might have tampered with those decanters. And, Aurora added, her voice steady despite her racing heart, we're going to discuss why the same people who tried to poison the Duke at Ravencourt are the same people whose financial crimes would be exposed if the Duke and I continue investigating. We're going to talk about motives and opportunities and patterns of behavior. You're insane, Lady Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. Both of you, you've invented this conspiracy out of paranoia and desperation. Have we? The Duke gestured to Edmund Fairfax, who'd been standing quietly near the door. Sir Edmund, if you would share what you discovered this afternoon. Edmund stepped forward, his expression grave. I've spent the past 2 weeks examining financial records and legal documents. What I've found is a network of fraud spanning at least 5 years, involving falsified insurance claims, illegal ship sales, market manipulation, and the systematic destruction of competing businesses. The total value of the fraud exceeds £2 million. Gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. £2 million was a staggering sum, enough to fund wars, topple governments, or corrupt entire institutions. And the people involved, Edmund continued, have been using their positions of power to silence anyone who discovered their crimes, including attempting to murder the Duke when he refused to become complicit. Chancellor Hastings' face had gone from red to gray. These accusations are treasonous. I am the king's representative. Which makes your crimes even more egregious, the Duke said flatly. You've betrayed not just the law, but your sworn oath to the crown. When this information reaches the king, and it will, your position won't protect you. Nothing will. Aurora watched as the reality of exposure settled over the conspirators. Hastings' hands trembled. Pemberton had gone pale. Lady Vivian's carefully maintained composure was cracking, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. You think you've won, Lady Vivian said, her voice low and venomous. You think exposing us means justice will follow. But you're forgetting something crucial. We have power, connections, resources. We can bury this evidence, discredit your investigators, destroy anyone who testifies against us. You may have caught us, but you can't hold us. Can't we? Aurora felt a fierce satisfaction as she delivered the final piece of their strategy. You're right that you have power, but so does the press. And tomorrow morning, every newspaper in London will publish the full details of this conspiracy. Names, dates, amounts. Everything. The court of public opinion will convict you before any legal proceeding begins. You wouldn't dare, Pemberton breathed. The scandal would destroy half the peerage, the guilty half, the Duke corrected. The half that deserves destruction. We're not protecting criminals anymore, Pemberton. That era is over. The room had divided now, Aurora realized. Some nobles sat frozen in shock, clearly innocent of the conspiracy, but horrified by the revelation. Others, the guilty ones, had formed a tight cluster, their expressions ranging from panic to rage. And then Lord Thorne did something that changed everything. He pulled a pistol from his jacket. The weapon gleamed in the candlelight, small but unmistakably deadly. Women screamed, men shouted. Guards who'd been disguised as servants reached for their own weapons, but Thorne had already leveled his pistol at Aurora. "Nobody moves," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "Nobody moves, or I shoot her." The Duke went absolutely still, though Aurora could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. "Thorne, think about what you're doing. You pull that trigger in front of 40 witnesses, and there's no explanation, no escape. You'll hang." "I'll hang anyway." Thorne's laugh was edged with hysteria. "You just exposed everything. My family's fortune is built on those shipping contracts, on those fraudulent claims. If this becomes public, we're ruined. Completely ruined. So what difference does one more crime make?" "The difference," Aurora said quietly, surprised by the calmness in her own voice, "is that right now you might face prison and financial ruin. But you'll live. Your children will live. Your name, though damaged, can eventually recover. But if you murder me in cold blood, you don't just destroy yourself. You destroy your entire bloodline." "My bloodline is already destroyed." "You destroyed it. You and your self-righteous crusade, your refusal to mind your own business, your insistence on exposing things that should have stayed hidden." Thorne's hand tightened on the pistol. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." Aurora saw the decision forming in his eyes, saw his finger begin to squeeze the trigger. Time seemed to slow, crystallizing into sharp-edged clarity. She saw the Duke move, saw him step between her and the gun in a motion driven by pure instinct. She saw the muzzle flash, heard the deafening crack of the pistol shot, felt the Duke's weight slam into her as he shoved her aside. And then chaos erupted. Guards swarmed Thorne, wrestling him to the ground. Women screamed, men shouted. Aurora scrambled to her knees, searching desperately for the Duke in the confusion. He was on the floor beside her, his hand pressed to his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "No," Aurora breathed, pressing her own hands over his, trying to staunch the bleeding. "No, no, no." "I'm fine," he gritted out, though his face was pale. "It went through. Clean shot. I'm fine." "You're shot!" Aurora's voice cracked. "You took a bullet for me, you absolute idiot!" "Couldn't let him shoot you." The Duke's breathing was labored. Would have rather complicated the engagement. Despite everything, the blood, the chaos, the danger, Aurora felt a shocked laugh escape. "This is not the time for jokes." "Disagree. Perfect time." His gray eyes found hers, intense despite the pain. "You're safe. That's what matters." Aurora's mother appeared with napkins, applying pressure to the wound with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd dealt with injuries before. "The bullet went through," she confirmed. "He'll need a doctor, but it's not fatal. Aurora, keep pressure on it while I send for help." As her mother moved away, barking orders with surprising authority, Aurora looked down at the Duke. His blood was on her hands, warm and terrifying. He'd thrown himself in front of a bullet for her, had risked his life without hesitation because the alternative, watching her die, was unthinkable to him. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because," the Duke said, his voice growing weaker but his gaze unwavering, "you're not just my ally anymore. You're not just the woman I'm using as bait or political strategy. You're Ritgits." He paused, searching for words. "You're the only person who's ever seen past the title, the power, the fear everyone else feels. You saw a man about to be murdered, and you risked everything to save him. How could I do less for you?" Aurora felt tears spill over, hot against her cheeks. Around them, the dinner had dissolved into complete disorder. Guards had Thorne in custody, along with several other conspirators who'd tried to flee. Servants attended to panicked guests. And in the center of it all, Aurora knelt beside the Duke, their blood mingling on the ballroom floor, and understood with perfect clarity that this had stopped being a strategic alliance somewhere along the way. "You're an idiot," she told him fiercely. "A reckless, self-sacrificing idiot." "Runs in the family," he managed, his smile weak but genuine. "My mother would be horrified. I actually like someone." "Like?" Aurora shook her head, emotions overwhelming her careful control. "You took a bullet for me, Alistair. That's not like." "No," he agreed softly. "It's not." The doctor arrived, shouting for space and light. Aurora was pulled away from the Duke, her hands sticky with his blood, her mind reeling from the evening's violence. But as they carried him to another room for treatment, as the conspirators were led away in chains, as the full scope of what they'd accomplished began to settle over the shocked assembly, Aurora realized something crucial. They'd won. The conspiracy was exposed, the criminals caught, the evidence documented by 40 witnesses. Lady Vivian, Chancellor Hastings, Lord Pemberton, Lord Thorne, all of them would face justice. The network of corruption was shattered, but the cost had been higher than she'd anticipated. The Duke was wounded, possibly seriously. Her own hands shook with delayed shock, and she'd discovered that what had started as a desperate alliance had become something far more complicated and dangerous than any conspiracy. She'd fallen in love with a Duke who'd taken a bullet for her. And nothing, not society's judgment, not her family's concerns, not even the rational voice in her head screaming about the impossibility of it all, could change that now. Countess Blackwood appeared at Aurora's side, her dark eyes knowing. "That was quite the demonstration, child. Both of you." "Is he going to be all right?" Aurora asked, her voice small. "The doctor believes so. The wound is clean, no vital organs damaged. He'll recover." The Countess studied Aurora's blood-stained hands, but I suspect his physical injury is the least significant thing that happened tonight. Aurora looked at the Countess, reading the understanding in her expression. "I didn't plan this, any of this. The best things are rarely planned." The Countess's smile was slight. "You saved his life twice now, Aurora. Once from poison, once from living alone in that fortress he'd built around himself. The question is what you'll do with that power." Before Aurora could respond, Edmund approached, his expression a mixture of triumph and concern. "The authorities are here. They're taking the conspirators into custody. Between the attempted poisoning, the shooting, and 40 witnesses to both crimes, there's no way they can escape prosecution. You did it, Aurora. You actually did it." But Aurora was only half listening. Her attention was fixed on the room where they'd taken the Duke, where a doctor worked to save the man who'd risked everything for her. The trap had been set. The enemies had been caught. Justice, at long last, was being served. But as Aurora stood there, her hands stained with the Duke's blood and her heart shattered by the realization of how much he'd come to mean to her, she understood that the real trial was only beginning. Because now she had to figure out if the engagement they'd announced as strategy could become something real. If a merchant's daughter and a duke could build something genuine from the ruins of conspiracy and violence, if love forged in fire could survive in the cold light of day, the Duke had taken a bullet for her. Now Aurora had to decide if she was brave enough to give him her heart. The doctor emerged from the Duke's private chambers 3 hours after midnight, his shirt sleeves still stained with blood, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes betraying exhaustion. Aurora rose immediately from the chair where she'd been waiting, her mother's hand on her shoulder, a steadying presence. "The bullet passed cleanly through the shoulder muscle," the doctor reported, addressing the small group assembled in the hallway. Aurora, her parents, Edmund, and Countess Blackwood. "No bone damage, no arterial involvement. He was extraordinarily lucky. With proper rest and care, he should recover fully within 6 weeks." "Can I see him?" Aurora asked, her voice hoarse from hours of silent worry. The doctor hesitated. "He's sedated. The laudanum I administered for the pain will keep him unconscious until morning. Perhaps it would be better—" "I need to see him." Aurora's tone left no room for argument. "Even if he's asleep, I need to see that he's alive." The doctor exchanged a glance with Countess Blackwood, who nodded almost imperceptibly. 5 minutes, he conceded. "No more. The Duke needs rest above all else." Aurora slipped into the darkened chamber, her heart clenching at the sight of Alistair laid out on the massive 4-poster bed that dominated the room. He looked younger in sleep, The harsh lines of command softened, his breathing deep and even. White bandages wrapped his shoulder, a stark contrast against his bare chest. Someone, probably the doctor, had washed away the blood, but Aurora could still see it in her mind, could still feel the warm wetness of it on her hands. She approached the bed silently, settling into the chair beside it. Without thinking, she reached out and took his uninjured hand, her fingers intertwining with his. His skin was warm, alive, real. The terror that had gripped her since the gunshot began to ease fractionally. "You absolute fool," she whispered, "throwing yourself in front of a bullet. What were you thinking?" Of course he didn't answer, but Aurora could imagine what he'd say, something dry and sarcastic about how thinking wasn't exactly a priority when someone was aiming a gun at her, something that would make her want to laugh and cry simultaneously. "I don't know how this happened," she continued, her voice soft in the darkness. "How you went from being the terrifying Duke of Crown to being this, to being someone I can't imagine living without, someone whose safety matters more than my own." She studied his face, memorizing the sharp line of his jaw, the dark sweep of his lashes against his cheeks, the slight furrow between his brows that suggested even unconscious. He was strategizing. "When you wake up," Aurora said, "we're going to have a very serious conversation about your self-preservation instincts, because they're terrible, absolutely terrible." A light cough from the doorway made Aurora turn. Countess Blackwood stood there, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Time's up, I'm afraid," the Countess said gently. "Though I suspect the doctor would grant you more if you asked. You saved the Duke's life twice now. That buys considerable indulgence." Aurora stood reluctantly, releasing Alistair's hand with a final squeeze. "Will you stay? Make sure he's not alone? I'll have guards posted outside his door and servants checking on him hourly. He'll be safe, Aurora. You have my word." The Countess paused. "What he needs now isn't protection. It's time to heal, as do you." Aurora looked down at her gown, still stained with blood, and realized she was trembling with exhaustion. "I need to go home. My parents are waiting in the drawing room with tea and brandy, in that order. Come, let the Duke rest." The next morning arrived with a chaos of its own making. Aurora woke in her own bed, fully clothed except for her ruined gown, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. Sunlight streamed through her window with aggressive cheerfulness, and from downstairs came the sound of urgent voices. She descended to find her home besieged by messengers, newspapermen, and curiosity seekers. Her father stood at the door, turning away reporters with increasingly creative threats, while her mother organized the flood of calling cards, letters, and packages that had arrived since dawn. "What's happening?" Aurora asked, still foggy from too little sleep. Her mother thrust a newspaper into her hands. "See for yourself." The headline blazed across the front page in letters 2 inches tall. "Conspiracy exposed. Duke shot protecting fiancé as noble network crumbles." Aurora scanned the article with growing astonishment. It detailed everything: the poisoning attempt at Ravencourt, the investigation, the dinner party trap, Lord Thorne's shooting of the Duke, and the arrest of multiple high-ranking nobles for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The journalist had clearly been well informed, probably by Edmund or one of the Duke's other allies. But what struck Aurora most was the tone. Instead of the sneering condemnation she'd grown accustomed to, the article portrayed her as a hero, a brave young woman who'd risked everything to expose corruption, who'd stood firm against social destruction and physical danger, who'd helped bring down criminals who'd operated with impunity for years. "There are 5 more like that," her mother said, gesturing to a stack of newspapers. Different publications, all saying essentially the same thing. Someone orchestrated this coverage very carefully. "The Duke," Aurora said immediately. "Or Edmund. They must have prepared these stories in advance, ready to publish if the dinner went badly." "Well, it went spectacularly badly, and now you're the toast of London." Her father appeared, looking harried. "There are 3 carriages waiting outside with invitations to tea, 2 requests for interviews, and, I'm not making this up, a marriage proposal from someone calling himself your devoted admirer. The lunacy is impressive." Aurora sank into a chair, her mind struggling to process this reversal. "They hated me yesterday, called me a fraud, a social climber, a liar. And now you're proof that the system can be challenged," her mother said quietly. that power can be held accountable, that truth matters more than status. She sat beside Aurora, her expression serious. People love a redemption story, Aurora, especially when it comes with nobility exposed as villains and a duke taking a bullet for his betrothed. It's everything the scandal sheets dream of. The word betrothed sent a jolt through Aurora's system. In the chaos of last night, she'd almost forgotten that the engagement announcement had been made, that she was at least publicly promised to marry Duke Alistair Crown. "I need to see him," Aurora said, standing abruptly. "I need to know how he is, what he's thinking, whether—" A knock at the door interrupted her. Her father answered it to reveal one of the Duke's footmen carrying a sealed letter. "For Lady Aurora," the footman said formally. "From His Grace," with instructions to wait for a reply. Aurora broke the seal with trembling fingers. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakably Alistair's. The doctor informs me I'm to be an invalid for weeks. Intolerable. I need you here, ostensibly to help manage the fallout from last night, but actually because this room is insufferably dull and you're the only person whose company I can tolerate for extended periods. Also, we should probably discuss whether the engagement we announced for strategic purposes remains strategic or has become something else entirely. I have opinions on the matter, but they're possibly influenced by laudanum, so take them with appropriate skepticism. Come when you can. Bring chess. And perhaps something to throw at me when I inevitably say something that annoys you. AC Aurora read it twice, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The formal distance of their early alliance was completely absent, replaced by something intimate and real and terrifying. "Well?" her mother asked. "He wants me to visit, to discuss things." Aurora looked at her parents, suddenly uncertain. "Is that proper? I mean, we're engaged, but it was supposed to be fake, except now it might not be, and he's injured, and—" "Aurora." Her father's voice was firm but kind. "That man took a bullet for you. If you want to visit him, visit him. Anyone who suggests impropriety can take it up with me." 30 minutes later, Aurora found herself back at the Duke's residence, being escorted to his private chambers by a maid who kept shooting her knowing looks. She'd changed into a simple day dress and had managed to wash the blood from her hands, though the memory of it remained. Alistair was awake, propped against pillows, his shoulder heavily bandaged. He looked pale, but alert, his gray eyes tracking her movement as she entered. "You look terrible," Aurora said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Flatterer." His voice was rough but amused. "You should see the other fellow. Oh, wait, he's in custody awaiting trial for attempted murder. I did see him, technically." "This isn't funny. You could have died. But I didn't, and neither did you, which was rather the point of the exercise." Alistair shifted carefully, wincing. "Though I'll admit, getting shot was not part of the original strategy." Aurora felt anger surge through her exhaustion. "You threw yourself in front of a gun, Alistair. You didn't hesitate, didn't think, just moved. Do you have any idea how terrifying that was? Watching you fall, seeing the blood." "I imagine," he interrupted quietly, "it was similar to what I felt watching someone aim a pistol at you. The difference being that I had the option to do something about it." The words hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said. Aurora looked at this man who'd upended her entire world, who'd taken her desperate gamble and turned it into a crusade, who'd risked his life without hesitation because the alternative was unthinkable. "The engagement," she said finally. "We announced it as strategy, a way to force our enemies to act. We did. And now those enemies are arrested. The conspiracy is exposed. The strategy has served its purpose." "It has." Aurora took a breath. "So the engagement could be, dissolved. Called off, now that the crisis has passed. No one would question it, given everything that's happened." Alistair was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you want?" "I asked first." "So you did." He met her gaze directly. "No, it's not what I want. The engagement may have started as strategy, Aurora, but somewhere between the poison and the pistol, it became real for me. You became real for me. Not as a political ally or a useful witness, but as someone I can't imagine not having in my life." Aurora felt her breath catch. That's the laudanum talking. I'm not taking laudanum anymore. Refused it this morning because I wanted my head clear for this conversation. Alistair's smile was slight. So when I tell you that I want this engagement to be real, that I want you as my wife, not because of strategy, but because I've somehow fallen completely in love with you despite my better judgment, that's me, fully conscious and terrifyingly sincere. The declaration hit Aurora like a physical force. She'd suspected, hoped, feared this moment, but hearing it spoken aloud made it undeniably real. "You don't love people," she said weakly. "Everyone says so. The cold duke, the ruthless strategist. Everyone was right. I didn't love people. I didn't trust anyone enough for that." Alistair reached for her hand with his good arm. "And then you threw yourself between me and a poisoned glass, risked everything for a stranger, and refused to back down when the entire world turned against you. How could I not fall in love with that kind of courage?" Aurora's eyes burned with tears she'd been holding back for hours. "I'm terrified. Of this, of us, of what it means." "Good. So am I. We can be terrified together." "I don't know how to be a duchess. I barely know how to be accepted in society. You exposed a conspiracy, brought down corrupt nobles, and survived multiple murder attempts. I think you can handle some etiquette requirements." Alistair's grip on her hand tightened. "Aurora, I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, the woman who sees truth and refuses to look away, who fights for what's right, even when it costs her everything. That's who I want beside me." Aurora looked at their joined hands, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The poisoned wine, the social destruction, the warehouse fire, the bullet, every brutal test that had forged what had started as necessity into something far more profound. "I love you," she said quietly, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you believed me when no one else would. Maybe when you stood beside me at that ball. Maybe when you took that bullet. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being the fearsome duke and became just Alistair, the man I can't imagine living without." His smile was brilliant, transforming his usually austere features into something warm and genuine. "Then we're agreed? This engagement becomes real?" "On one condition. Name it." "No more throwing yourself in front of bullets. My heart can't take it." "I'll do my best, though I make no promises if someone aims another gun at you." Aurora leaned forward carefully, mindful of his injury, and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, their first real kiss untainted by strategy or performance. When they parted, both were smiling. "The newspapers are calling me a hero," Aurora said. "It's disconcerting. Yesterday I was a fraud and a social climber." "Society is fickle. They love a redemption arc." Alistair's expression turned more serious. "But the coverage isn't accidental. Edmund arranged for friendly journalists to have exclusive access to the story, complete with details about the conspiracy. By the time the arrested nobles can mount a defense, public opinion will have already convicted them." "That's manipulative. That's justice. They use their power and influence to commit crimes and destroy innocents. We're using information and public sentiment to ensure they face consequences. It's not perfect, but it's what we have." A knock at the door preceded Edmund's entrance. The lawyer looked exhausted but triumphant, carrying several legal documents. "Excellent. You're both here," he said without preamble. "The Crown Prosecution has formally charged Lady Vivian Ashford, Chancellor Hastings, Lord Pemberton, and Lord Thorne with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, and various other offenses. The evidence is overwhelming. They'll go to trial within the month." "What about their allies?" Aurora asked. "The others involved in the network?" "Several have already turned witness, offering testimony in exchange for lighter sentences. The entire conspiracy is unraveling. We've identified at least 12 nobles involved in various capacities." Edmund's smile was sharp. "Your trap worked perfectly. Thorne's shooting of the Duke in front of 40 witnesses made denial impossible. They're eating each other alive trying to save themselves." "And our evidence?" Alistair asked. "The financial records? The shipping manifests?" "Being verified by Crown auditors as we speak. It's all legitimate, all damning, all pointing to a systematic pattern of criminal activity spanning years." Edmund set down his documents. You've done something extraordinary here. You've proven that even the most powerful can be held accountable. That truth, properly deployed, can defeat entrenched corruption. Aurora felt the weight of that accomplishment settling over her. They'd actually done it. Against impossible odds, facing social destruction and physical danger, they'd exposed a conspiracy and brought criminals to justice. There will be consequences, Edmund warned. Political fallout, social realignment. Some nobles will never forgive you for exposing their peers. But Aurora, you've also gained powerful allies. People who believe in what you've accomplished, who see you as proof that the system can work if people are brave enough to fight for it. Speaking of allies, Alistair said, has Countess Blackwood made any statement? She issued a formal declaration this morning, supporting the prosecution and commending both of you for your courage and integrity. Coming from her, that's significant. She's essentially telling society that opposing you means opposing her. Edmund's expression was approving. You've played this brilliantly, both of you. After Edmund left to continue coordinating the legal proceedings, Aurora and Alistair sat in comfortable silence. Through the window, Aurora could see carriages coming and going, the normal traffic of a duke's residence, but everything felt different now. Changed. What happens now? She asked. After the trials, after the conspirators are convicted, what do we do? Alistair considered the question. We build something better. Use the influence we've gained to reform the systems that allowed this corruption to flourish. We make it harder for powerful people to commit crimes with impunity. We prove that nobility should mean something more than title and wealth. That's ambitious. You saved my life by being ambitious. Seemed worth continuing. Over the following weeks, as Alistair recovered and the conspiracy trials progressed, Aurora watched society transform around her. The same people who'd shunned her now sought her company. Invitations flooded in, to dinners, balls, garden parties, salons. Everyone wanted to meet the woman who'd brought down a criminal network, who'd stood firm against corruption, who'd captured a duke's heart. Some of the attention was genuine. Lady Catherine Westbrook, a young noble with reformist sympathies, became a true friend. Several members of Parliament reached out, interested in Aurora's perspective on social mobility and business regulation. The genuine connections felt hard-won and precious, but much of the attention was opportunistic. People who'd called her a fraud now praised her courage, their hypocrisy so blatant it would have been amusing if it weren't so insulting. Aurora learned to smile politely, to accept the praise without believing it, to recognize that society's approval was as fickle as its condemnation. The trials themselves became the social event of the season. Aurora attended every day, sitting in the public gallery with Alistair beside her, his shoulders still healing but his presence unwavering. She watched as the prosecutors laid out the evidence: financial records, testimony from witnesses, documentation of fraud and conspiracy. She saw Lady Vivian's composed facade crack as her crimes were detailed for the court. Watched Chancellor Hastings try to maintain his dignity as his betrayal of public trust was exposed. Observed Lord Pemberton and Lord Thorne attempt to shift blame onto others, only to be contradicted by their own correspondence. The defense tried everything, claiming the evidence was fabricated, suggesting Aurora had manipulated the Duke, arguing that business practices that were technically illegal were merely aggressive capitalism. But 40 witnesses to the poisoning and shooting made the attempted murder charges impossible to refute. And once those charges stuck, the pattern of criminal behavior became undeniable. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Aurora sat beside Alistair, her hand in his, as the jury foreman stood to deliver the judgment. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of Duke Alistair Crown, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to murder, guilty. The verdicts continued, each one driving another nail into the coffin of the conspiracy. Lady Vivian went white, then red, her composure finally shattering completely. Hastings sat frozen, his political career ending in the space of those repeated guilty verdicts. Pemberton wept openly. Thorne shouted about injustice until guards silenced him. The sentences came swiftly. Lady Vivian, 20 years imprisonment, all assets seized to repay victims of the fraud. Chancellor Hastings, stripped of title and position, 15 years imprisonment. Lord Pemberton. 12 years. Lord Thorne. Life imprisonment for the attempted murder of a duke. Aurora felt Alistair's hand tighten on hers as the judge delivered the final sentence. They'd won. Completely, undeniably, permanently won. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Aurora expected hostility, or at least skepticism. Instead, she found something extraordinary. People cheering. Common folk, merchants, laborers, people who'd watched the trial and seen powerful nobles held accountable for the first time in memory. "Lady Aurora!" someone shouted. "You gave them hell!" "3 cheers for the Duke's lady," another voice called, and the crowd erupted in approval. Alistair leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "They love you, truly love you, not because of title or strategy, but because you fought for them without knowing it. You proved that justice can win." Aurora looked out at the crowd, at the genuine admiration in their faces, and felt something shift inside her. She'd spent so long fighting to be accepted by high society, to prove she belonged in those gilded rooms and exclusive circles. But this acceptance from ordinary people who saw her as one of their own, who'd risen up and made a difference, this felt more valuable than any aristocratic approval. "We should say something," she murmured to Alistair. "You should say something," he corrected. "They're here for you." Aurora stepped forward and the crowd quieted, waiting. She'd given speeches before, carefully rehearsed words designed to navigate social expectations. But this moment called for something different, something true. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "For believing in truth when it would have been easier to accept lies. For demanding accountability when power tried to hide behind privilege. This victory isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who refused to look away from injustice, who insisted that right should matter more than rank." The crowd roared approval. Someone started singing, and others joined in. Not a noble anthem, but a working-class song about justice and redemption. Aurora felt tears prick her eyes as the music swelled. Alistair's arm slipped around her waist, careful of his healing shoulder. "Ready to face the rest of it?" he asked quietly. "The marriage, the title, the lifelong project of reforming a corrupt system?" Aurora looked at him, this man who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through every trial, who'd taken a bullet rather than watch her die. She thought about the girl she'd been at that first dinner, desperate to belong and terrified of exposure. That girl was gone, forged by fire into someone stronger. "I'm ready," she said, "for all of it." That evening, at a small private dinner hosted by Countess Blackwood, the social rehabilitation of Aurora Vale became official. The Countess had invited 20 of the most influential nobles in England, all carefully chosen for their reformist sympathies or their respect for justice. "To Lady Aurora," the Countess said, raising her glass, "who reminded us all that courage matters more than birthright, and that truth, however inconvenient, must be honored." The nobles drank, and Aurora saw genuine respect in their expressions. These were people who'd chosen to support her not out of fear or opportunism, but because they believed in what she represented. Lord Berkeley, an older statesman known for his integrity, approached Aurora during the dinner. "My wife and I would be honored to host your wedding, Lady Aurora, if you and the Duke haven't already made arrangements." Aurora glanced at Alistair, who nodded slightly. "That's extraordinarily generous, Lord Berkeley." "It's strategic," he said bluntly. "Your marriage will be a social statement. Having it at Berkeley House signals that the old guard supports this union, that we recognize the value of bringing new perspectives into our circles. Plus, it will irritate all the right people." Aurora laughed, appreciating his candor. "Then we accept, with gratitude." As the dinner continued, Aurora found herself in conversation with Lady Catherine Westbrook, discussing potential reforms to business regulations that had allowed the fraud to flourish. "You could do real good here," Catherine said earnestly. "As the Duchess of Crown, you'll have influence, platform, access. Use it. Push for changes that protect people like your father, honest businessmen who shouldn't have to fear being crushed by corrupt nobles." "You're assuming I'll be any good at being a duchess." "You'll be extraordinary at it. You already are." Catherine's smile was warm. "You've proven that outsiders can not only survive in our world, but change it. That's more valuable than any bloodline." Later, as Alistair and Aurora rode home in his carriage, she leaned against his good shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Did today feel real to you?" she asked. "The verdicts, the crowd, the dinner? Because part of me keeps expecting to wake up and find it was all a dream." "It's real," Alistair assured her. "Improbably, impossibly real. You took a desperate gamble to save a stranger's life, and somehow that gamble led to exposing corruption, bringing down criminals, and, if I'm very lucky, marrying the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Aurora tilted her head to look at him. "You know this is permanent now, right? We can't take it back. Once we're married, you're stuck with me. With my opinions, my causes, my complete lack of patience for aristocratic nonsense. I'm counting on it. Someone needs to keep me honest." His expression softened. "Aurora, before you, I was just existing, going through the motions of power without purpose. You gave me something to fight for that matters more than influence or wealth. You gave me hope that maybe nobility could mean something real again. That's a lot of pressure. You can handle it. You've handled everything else." When they reached Aurora's home, she found her parents waiting with news. Her father's business partners, the ones who'd abandoned him after the warehouse fire, had returned with profuse apologies and renewed contracts. The insurance company had agreed to pay out the claim in full. Multiple investors had approached about funding new ventures. "Apparently," her father said dryly, "being the father of the woman who exposed a noble conspiracy makes me a very attractive business partner. The hypocrisy is staggering." "Take their money anyway," Aurora advised. "Use it to build something good, something that employs honest people and treats them fairly. Make them fund their own obsolescence." Her father's laugh was surprised and delighted. "When did you become so ruthless?" "I learned from the best," Aurora said, thinking of Alistair's strategic mind, of the way he'd turned every attack into an opportunity. That night, lying in her own bed in her family's modest home, Aurora reflected on the impossible journey from that first dinner to this moment. She'd gone from outsider to hero, from suspected fraud to celebrated reformer, from desperate social climber to Duke's fiancé. Every step had been brutal, terrifying, and absolutely worth it, because she'd learned something crucial. Truth was more powerful than any title. Courage mattered more than birthright. And love, real, honest, tested by fire love, was the most valuable thing of all. In 6 weeks, she would marry Duke Alistair Crown. She would become a duchess, gain influence and platform, enter a world that had once seemed impossibly remote. But more importantly, she would marry a man who'd taken a bullet for her, who believed in her when no one else would, who saw her not as a social climber or useful ally, but as an equal worth fighting beside. The warehouse fire had tried to break her. The social attacks had tried to destroy her. The conspiracy had tried to silence her. They'd all failed. And tomorrow, Aurora would begin the next phase of this improbable story, not as a victim or an outsider, but as someone who'd proven that even the most entrenched power could be challenged, that even the coldest duke could learn to love, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world was a woman brave enough to tell the truth. The morning of Aurora's wedding dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that felt almost orchestrated, as if even the weather recognized the significance of the day. She woke in her childhood bedroom for the last time, sunlight streaming through familiar windows, and allowed herself a moment of pure stillness before the chaos began. Her mother entered carrying tea, her eyes already wet with tears she was trying valiantly to contain. "Don't start," Aurora warned, though her own throat felt tight. "If you cry, I'll cry, and then my face will be blotchy for the ceremony." "I'm allowed to cry. I'm losing my daughter to a duke." Her mother set down the tea with trembling hands. "Though I suppose I lost you the moment you decided to throw yourself between a powerful man and a poisoned glass. That girl who left for that first dinner, she's not the woman sitting here now." Aurora thought about that assessment. Her mother was right. The desperate, uncertain girl who'd attended the Ravencourt dinner had been forged by fire into someone fundamentally different, someone who'd faced social destruction and physical danger and emerged not just intact but stronger. "I'm still your daughter," Aurora said softly. "That hasn't changed." "No, but everything else has." Her mother sat beside her on the bed. "Aurora, I owe you an apology. After the warehouse fire, I blamed you. I was angry and terrified, and I lashed out. But you were right to fight back. You were right about everything. You were scared. I understand that. I was wrong, and you were extraordinary." Her mother took Aurora's hands. "Your father and I, we taught you to survive, to be careful, to know your place. But you taught us something far more important, that some things are worth risking everything for, that courage matters more than safety, that truth is more valuable than comfort." Aurora felt tears threatening despite her earlier warning. "I learned that from you, both of you. You risked everything to build a better life for our family. I just continued what you started." The knock at the door signaled the arrival of the dressmakers, and Aurora's quiet morning dissolved into organized chaos. The wedding gown was a masterpiece, ivory silk with delicate lace, cut to emphasize elegance rather than ostentation. It was a dress that said the bride was confident enough not to prove anything, secure enough not to compete. As the dressmakers worked, Lady Catherine Westbrook arrived with several other noble women who'd become genuine allies over the past weeks. They'd appointed themselves Aurora's attendants, a statement of support that hadn't gone unnoticed by society. "The crowds outside Berkeley House are already gathering," Catherine reported, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "People are lining the streets, not just nobility, everyone. Merchants, laborers, shopgirls. They're calling it the wedding of the decade." "It's a wedding," Aurora protested, though she couldn't suppress a smile. "Just two people getting married." "It's a symbol," corrected Lady Margaret Ashton, an older duchess known for her political acumen. "It represents everything we've fought for: merit over birthright, courage over privilege, love over strategy. When you walk down that aisle today, you're not just marrying the Duke. You're proving that the old order can change, that outsiders can not only survive but thrive and transform our world." The weight of that symbolism settled over Aurora like an additional layer of lace. She'd never asked to be a symbol, had never wanted to represent anything beyond her own truth, but somewhere between the poison and the present, her personal fight for justice had become something larger. "No pressure then," she said lightly, trying to diffuse the gravity. "Actually, massive pressure," Catherine said cheerfully. "But you've handled everything else. You'll handle this too." Berkeley House was a magnificent estate in the heart of London, its ballroom transformed into something between a cathedral and a garden. White roses cascaded from every surface, their perfume mixing with candlelight to create an atmosphere of ethereal beauty. The guest list read like a who's who of English power. Every influential noble, politician, and reformer had been invited, and most had come. Aurora's father escorted her through the crowd to the entrance, his arm steady beneath her hand. She could see people turning to look, could hear the whispers of admiration and speculation, but her attention fixed on the figure waiting at the altar. Alistair stood beneath an arch of white roses, his formal attire immaculate, his posture military straight. But when his eyes found Aurora's, she saw his composure crack, saw genuine emotion break through that carefully cultivated control. He was still healing. His shoulder remained bandaged beneath his jacket, a reminder of the bullet he'd taken for her. But he stood without support, without weakness, his presence commanding even in injury. The walk down the aisle felt eternal and instantaneous simultaneously. Aurora was intensely aware of every eye watching, every breath held, every person bearing witness to this impossible union. But beneath that awareness ran a current of absolute certainty. This was right. This was real. This was exactly where she was meant to be. When she reached Alistair, he took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "You're late," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "I'm exactly on time. You were early. I've been waiting for this moment since the day you saved my life. Everything else has been delay." The ceremony itself was traditional but infused with personal touches. Edmund Fairfax served as witness, standing beside Alistair with obvious pride. Aurora's parents sat in the front row, her mother openly weeping, her father's expression caught between joy and the grief of letting go. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, Aurora felt the room tense. After everything that had happened, the question carried extra weight. But the silence held. No dramatic interruptions, no last-minute revelations. Just acceptance. "Do you?" Alistair Edward Crown, Duke of Crown, take Aurora Elizabeth Vale to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was clear, unwavering, carrying to every corner of the packed ballroom. And do you, Aurora Elizabeth Vale, take Alistair Edward Crown to be your lawfully wedded husband? Aurora looked at the man before her, the Duke who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through social destruction and physical danger, who'd proven that titles meant nothing compared to character. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, every brutal test and impossible choice. I do, she said, her voice steady and sure. The kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by hundreds, but felt intensely private. It was a promise, a celebration, and a beginning all wrapped into one perfect moment. Ladies and gentlemen, the officiant announced, may I present the Duke and Duchess of Crown. The ballroom erupted in applause. Aurora turned to face the crowd as Duchess of Crown for the first time, and the weight of that title settled over her like a mantle. She'd fought for this, bled for this, nearly died for this. And now it was real. The reception was elaborate but joyful. Aurora found herself swept into conversations with nobles who'd once shunned her, accepting congratulations from people who'd called her a fraud weeks earlier. The hypocrisy might have bothered her once, but now she simply smiled and moved on. Their approval didn't matter, not when she had something far more valuable. Duchess? The voice was familiar but unexpected. Aurora turned to find Countess Blackwood approaching, a small velvet box in her hands. A wedding gift, from someone who recognizes quality when she sees it. Aurora opened the box to reveal an exquisite brooch, diamonds arranged in the shape of a phoenix rising from flames. It seemed appropriate, the Countess said, her dark eyes knowing. You've risen from the ashes of their attacks more powerful than before. Wear it as a reminder that they tried to destroy you and failed. Thank you, Aurora said, genuinely moved, for this and for everything. Your support meant more than you know. You've earned it, and Aurora, use that power wisely. You have influence now, platform, resources. The question is what you'll build with them. Before Aurora could respond, her father appeared, looking uncomfortable but determined. May I have this dance? He asked formally, as if addressing a stranger rather than his daughter. They moved onto the dance floor, and Aurora felt tears threatening again as her father guided her through the steps. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. Terrified for you, but proud. You've accomplished things I never dreamed possible. I had good teachers. You and Mother showed me that background doesn't determine destiny, that hard work and integrity matter more than birthright. We also taught you to be careful, to avoid drawing attention, to survive rather than fight. Her father's smile was rueful. Turns out, those lessons had limits. They kept me alive long enough to learn when to break the rules. As the dance ended, Alistair claimed Aurora for the next waltz. In his arms, moving through the crowded ballroom, she felt the enormity of what they'd accomplished settle over her. What are you thinking? He asked, reading something in her expression. That 6 weeks ago, I was nobody. A merchant's daughter desperately trying to belong in a world that didn't want me. And now I'm a duchess, dancing at my own wedding, surrounded by people who once despised me. And I'm wondering if any of this is real. If I'll wake up and find it was all an elaborate dream. Alistair's grip tightened fractionally. It's real. Every impossible, improbable bit of it. You saw something wrong and refused to look away. That choice changed everything. For me, for those criminals who thought themselves untouchable, for the people watching who needed to believe that justice could win. I just saved your life. Everything else spiraled out from there. You saved more than my life. You saved the possibility of hope, of believing that courage matters, that truth can defeat power, that one person's choice can change the world. He paused. Also, you gave me something I never expected to have. What's that? A partner. An equal. Someone who sees past the title to the man underneath and chooses him anyway. Alistair's expression was intense, vulnerable. I don't know what I did to deserve you, Aurora, but I'm not fool enough to question it. The next dance was interrupted by a commotion at the ballroom entrance. A royal messenger had arrived, bearing a sealed letter with the king's own seal. The room fell silent as Alistair broke the seal and read. Aurora watched his expression shift from curiosity to surprise to something approaching awe. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "A royal commendation. For both of us." Alistair's voice carried so the assembled guests could hear. "The king formally recognizes our service in exposing corruption within the peerage. He's also announcing new regulations for financial transparency and accountability, reforms based on the evidence we gathered." Applause erupted, but Aurora barely heard it. She was thinking about what this meant. Royal recognition legitimizing their fight, reforms ensuring that what they'd exposed couldn't easily happen again. Real lasting change born from her desperate choice to save a stranger. Lord Berkeley approached, his expression serious. "This is unprecedented. The king doesn't typically intervene in noble affairs so directly. But your case forced his hand, the public pressure, the evidence, the sheer scope of the corruption. You've changed the political landscape, Duchess." "We," Aurora corrected. "Alistair and I, Edmund, you, the Countess, everyone who stood with us. This wasn't my victory alone." "Perhaps not. But you were the catalyst. The one who refused to accept that power meant immunity." Berkeley's smile was approving. "Use that influence well. The reforms are just beginning. There's decades of work ahead to truly transform our system, but you've proven it's possible." As the evening progressed, Aurora found herself in conversation with various nobles about specific reforms, business regulations, legal protections for witnesses, transparency requirements. Ideas flowed, alliances formed, and she realized with growing clarity what her role would be going forward. Not just Duchess of Crown, ornamental and decorative, but advocate, reformer, voice for those who had none. Using her position to push for changes that would protect people like her father from being crushed by corrupt power. Late in the evening, Aurora stepped out onto a balcony for a moment of quiet. The city stretched before her, thousands of lights flickering in the darkness like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, working, dreaming, struggling to survive and build something better. "They're calling you the People's Duchess," Alistair said, joining her on the balcony. "In the taverns and shops. They've adopted you as one of their own who rose up and made a difference." "That terrifies me. I'm just one person. I can't fix everything that's broken." "No one expects you to. But you've proven that change is possible. That's often enough. Giving people hope that their circumstances aren't fixed, that fighting back can work." Alistair moved behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Besides, you're not alone. We're partners now. Officially, legally, permanently partners." Aurora leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "What comes next? After the celebration? After the honeymoon? After the immediate chaos settles?" "We build. We use our combined influence to push reforms through Parliament. We mentor others who want to fight corruption. We prove that nobility can mean something more than privilege and wealth." He paused. "And we live, Aurora. We make a life together that's about more than strategy and survival. We find joy in the middle of the work." "That sounds impossibly optimistic." "It is. But you've made me believe in impossible things. If a merchant's daughter can become a duchess and bring down a criminal conspiracy, what else might be possible?" The next morning, Aurora woke in the Duke's, her, residence for the first time as his wife. The massive bedroom felt foreign, too grand, too much. But Alistair's presence beside her grounded the strangeness. "Good morning, Duchess," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "That's going to take getting used to. You have the rest of your life to adjust." They spent the day receiving visitors, accepting congratulations, and beginning the complex dance of merged households and combined influence. Aurora's parents visited in the afternoon, her mother still teary, her father clearly awed by the circumstances. "Your mother wants to know if we should move to a larger house," her father said awkwardly. "Now that you're, well, a duchess. She worries our current home reflects poorly." "Don't!" Aurora's response was immediate and firm. "That house represents everything you built, everything you achieved through hard work and integrity. It's more valuable than any mansion. I won't have you changing who you are because of who I married." Her father's relief was visible. "Your mother will be pleased." She didn't want to move anyway, but felt she should offer. "Tell her she raised a duchess who remembers where she came from, who knows that worth has nothing to do with property size or title." Over the following weeks, Aurora settled into her new role with the same fierce determination she'd brought to exposing the conspiracy. She attended parliament sessions, pushing for the reforms the king had endorsed. She hosted salons for reformist nobles, creating space for conversations about transparency and accountability. She visited working-class neighborhoods, listening to concerns and identifying areas where change was needed. Some nobles objected, claiming she was overstepping the traditional bounds of a duchess's role, but Alistair's unwavering support and the king's public commendation made direct opposition difficult, and Aurora had learned a crucial lesson from their fight against the conspiracy. Power used openly was harder to attack than power hidden in shadows. 6 months after the wedding, Aurora stood before Parliament to testify about business regulations that would protect honest merchants from predatory practices. It was unprecedented for a woman, let alone a duchess, to address the legislative body directly. But she'd been invited, and she refused to waste the opportunity. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying through the chamber, "I come before you not as nobility, but as someone who understands both sides of the divide between power and those it affects. My father built his business through hard work, only to watch it nearly destroyed by corrupt nobles who believed themselves above consequence. That shouldn't be possible, not in a just society." She outlined specific reforms, transparency requirements, legal protections, mechanisms for reporting fraud. She spoke of her father's experience, of other merchants who'd faced similar attacks, of the systematic abuse of power that the conspiracy had exemplified. When she finished, the chamber was silent. Then Lord Berkeley stood and began to applaud, joined quickly by other reformist members. The traditionalists sat unmoved, but Aurora hadn't expected their support. She'd aimed for the middle, the uncertain nobles who could be swayed by evidence and reason. The reforms passed by a narrow margin, but they passed. Real change, enshrined in law, protecting people who'd previously had no recourse against noble predation. Alistair met her outside the chamber, his expression proud. "You were magnificent, terrifying but magnificent." "I was honest. Turned out that was enough." "It always was. The world just needed time to catch up." That evening they hosted a dinner for the allies who'd supported them throughout their fight. Edmund was there, along with the Countess, Lord Berkeley, Lady Catherine, and various other nobles who'd proven themselves genuine reformers rather than opportunists. "To Aurora and Alistair," the Countess proposed, raising her glass, "who reminded us that courage and conviction can defeat entrenched corruption, who proved that titles should be earned through character rather than inherited through accident of birth, who showed us all what partnership truly means." The toast was drunk, and conversation flowed into planning next steps. There was talk of educational reforms, legal protections for workers, transparency in government contracts. Ideas that had seemed impossible before the conspiracy's exposure now felt achievable. Aurora caught Alistair's eye across the table, saw her own satisfaction reflected in his expression. This was what they'd fought for, not just to bring down criminals, but to build something better in their place. Later, as their guest departed, Edmund pulled Aurora aside. "I've been approached by several young lawyers interested in cases involving abuse of power," he said. "They see what we accomplished and want to continue the work. I'm considering forming a practice dedicated to representing people who can't afford to fight back against noble corruption." "Do it," Aurora said immediately. "And when you need funding or political support, come to us. This can't end with one conspiracy exposed. It has to become systemic change." "I was hoping you'd say that." Edmund's smile was warm. "You've started something extraordinary, Aurora. A movement, really. People believe change is possible now. That's a powerful thing." Alone with Alistair finally, Aurora stood at the window of their private chambers, looking out over London's nighttime sprawl. "Do you regret it?" Alistair asked, joining her. "Choosing to save my life that night? Knowing everything that followed?" Aurora considered the question seriously. She thought about the social destruction, the warehouse fire, the bullet, the fear and exhaustion and constant pressure. She thought about her mother's tears and her father's worry and the weight of becoming a symbol for people she'd never met. Then she thought about justice served, criminals held accountable, reforms that would protect countless people. She thought about Edmund's practice, about young lawyers inspired to fight corruption, about merchants who could now report predatory behavior without fearing retaliation. She thought about Alistair, the man who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd taken a bullet rather than watch her die. Not for 1 second, she said firmly. I'd make the same choice again. Every time. Even knowing the cost? Especially knowing the cost. Because the cost was worth it. Aurora turned to face him fully. We changed things, Alistair. Really changed them. Not just punishing bad actors, but building systems to prevent future corruption. That's more valuable than any comfortable anonymity. You're remarkable. His hands cupped her face gently. I've known that since the moment you lunged across a table to knock poison from my hand. But watching you testify before Parliament, seeing you transform from desperate social climber to advocate for people who have no voice, it's extraordinary. I had a good teacher. You showed me that power is only valuable if you use it for something that matters. I showed you nothing. You already knew it. I just gave you a platform to prove it. Their kiss was interrupted by a knock at the door. A messenger had arrived with news. Lady Vivian had died in prison, her health broken by confinement and disgrace. The other conspirators remained imprisoned, their fortunes seized, their names synonymous with corruption. Aurora felt no triumph at the news, just a weary satisfaction that justice had been fully served. Lady Vivian had tried to murder and had paid the ultimate price. Not through execution, but through the destruction of everything she'd valued. Her legacy was one of shame and criminal conviction, a cautionary tale for anyone else tempted to believe power meant immunity. It's over, Alistair said quietly. Truly over. The conspiracy is ended, the criminals punished, the reforms implemented. We won completely. No. Aurora shook her head. It's not over, it's just beginning. This was one network of corruption exposed. How many others exist? How many more people need advocates, need someone willing to fight for them? We've started something, Alistair, but the work is far from finished. He studied her face, then smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his austere features. You're right, as always. So what's next, Duchess? What impossible task shall we tackle? Aurora thought about all the injustices she'd witnessed, all the people she'd met who needed help, all the systems that required reform. The scope was overwhelming, but for the first time she felt equal to it. Education, she decided. Access to learning for children whose parents can't afford tutors. If we want real change, it starts with giving everyone the tools to succeed, regardless of birth circumstances. Ambitious. I married a duke and brought down a conspiracy. Ambition seems appropriate. Over the following years, Aurora and Alistair became known as reformers who transformed English society. Their educational initiative opened schools in working-class neighborhoods, providing opportunities that had previously been restricted to noble children. Their advocacy led to additional reforms in business practices, legal protections, and government transparency. But perhaps more significantly, they changed the fundamental understanding of what nobility could mean. No longer just privilege and power, but responsibility and service. Using influence to protect rather than exploit, to build up rather than crush down. Aurora's father's business flourished, expanding into new markets with the protection of regulations that prevented predatory attacks. Her mother became a patron of the arts, using wealth to support young talents who lacked noble sponsorship. They remained in their modest home, proof that value wasn't measured in property size. Edmund's legal practice became renowned, winning case after case against nobles who tried to abuse their power. Young lawyers flocked to join him, inspired by the idea that law could serve justice rather than just the powerful. And Aurora and Alistair built a life together that balanced public service with private joy. They traveled, they laughed, they argued about strategy and policy. They hosted dinners for reformers and quiet evenings alone. They created a partnership that was equal in every way that mattered. 5 years after that first poisoned dinner, Aurora stood in the same ballroom at Ravencourt Estate, now under new ownership after its former lord had fled the country to avoid prosecution for his role in hiding the conspiracy. The space had been transformed into a school, its grand rooms converted to classrooms where children of all backgrounds learned together. This is where it started, Alistair said, standing beside her in what had once been the dining hall, where you saw poison being added to wine and made an impossible choice. It didn't feel impossible at the time. It felt necessary. Aurora looked around at the transformed space. Do you think she knew, Lady Vivian? When she slipped that poison into your wine, did she understand that she was setting all of this in motion? I doubt it. She thought she was eliminating an obstacle. Instead, she created a catalyst for change that destroyed her entire world. Alistair's hand found Aurora's. One moment, one choice, and everything that followed. No regrets, endless gratitude. For you, for your courage, for the life we've built. He paused, then added with a slight smile, though I could have done without being shot. That was your choice. I told you. Terrible self-preservation instincts. They stood together in the transformed ballroom, surrounded by evidence of how completely their fight had changed the landscape. Children laughed in rooms where nobles had once plotted. Teachers worked in spaces where corruption had festered. Hope flourished where despair had reigned. What do you think they'll say about us? Aurora asked. Years from now, when this is all history, how will they tell the story? Alistair considered. They'll probably focus on the drama, the poison, the conspiracy, the Duke who took a bullet for his love. They'll miss the important parts, which are that change requires courage, that one person's choice to act can inspire thousands, that systems of power can be challenged if enough people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. He turned to face Aurora fully. That a merchant's daughter and a duke proved partnership matters more than pedigree. That love built on respect and shared values is stronger than any based on status or strategy. Aurora felt tears threatening, happy ones this time. That's a good story. It's our story, and we're still writing it. The children's laughter echoed through the transformed ballroom as Aurora and Alistair walked hand in hand through the school they'd created together. Every step represented a choice made, a battle fought, a victory won. Every classroom represented hope for a future where background mattered less than character, where courage was valued over conformity, where truth could defeat even the most entrenched power. What had begun with poison in a wine glass had transformed into something neither Aurora nor Alistair could have imagined. A movement, a legacy, a fundamental shift in what nobility could mean. They'd proven that justice could win, that corruption could be defeated, that one desperate act of courage could change everything. The merchant's daughter, who'd saved a duke's life, had become a duchess who saved countless others. The feared and untouchable duke had become an advocate who used his power to protect rather than dominate. Together, they'd forged something that transcended their individual stories, proof that partnership, courage, and unwavering commitment to truth could transform the world. As they left the school that evening, Aurora paused at the entrance, looking back at the building that represented everything they'd fought for. Worth it? Alistair asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Aurora thought about the girl she'd been, desperate to belong, terrified of exposure, willing to accept the world as it was rather than fight for what it should be. She thought about the woman she'd become, confident in her worth, fearless in pursuit of justice, committed to building something better. Every impossible, terrifying, absolutely worth it moment, she confirmed. They walked out into the London evening, the Duke and Duchess of Crown, partners in every sense that mattered. Behind them, the school blazed with light, a beacon of hope for children who would grow up in a world their courage had helped create. Before them stretched the rest of their lives, filled with work still to be done, battles still to fight, changes still to make. But they would face it together, as equals, as partners, as proof that when courage chooses truth over silence, when love chooses sacrifice over safety, when two people refuse to accept that power means immunity from justice, anything becomes possible. Even a merchant's daughter becoming a duchess, even a feared duke learning to love, even a conspiracy that seemed untouchable being brought down by one woman's desperate choice to save a stranger's life. The story that had started with poison in a wine glass ended with hope in countless hearts. And somewhere in London, in modest homes and grand estates alike, people who'd watched Aurora's journey from outsider to advocate began to believe that maybe, just maybe, They too could challenge injustice, could demand better, could change the world. One choice at a time, one courageous act at a time, one life transformed at a time, until the entire world looked different than it had before a woman named Aurora Vale decided that some things, truth, justice, love, were worth any cost.